That night, I knelt on the cold kitchen tiles, my face stinging from my stepmother's slap and my hands still reeking of garbage. My grandmother stood in the doorway, staring at the place I called my father's, and asked, "Whose house is this really?" I never guessed that question would summon the police, unleash lawyers, unearth a secret will, and force my family to finally face the truth in court. My name is Elena Brooks, and as I walked through the heavy oak doors of the county courthouse just outside Riverton, Colorado, I felt 27 years of being the family disappointment walking in with me. The air in the room was stale, smelling faintly of floor wax and old coffee, but it was the weight of the stairs that made it hard to breathe. In a town this size, where the main street was just a mile long and everyone knew the exact year your roof was last shingled, a lawsuit like this was not just a legal proceeding, it was theater. And I was the villain in the play everyone had already reviewed. I kept my chin high, ignoring the burning sensation on the back of my neck as I made my way to the plaintiff's table. To my right, across the aisle that felt wider than the Grand Canyon, sat my father, Mark Brooks, and his wife, Vanessa. They looked like the picture of suburban respectability under siege. Mark was wearing his Sunday best, a navy suit that had gotten a little tight around the waist over the years. His hands clasped white-knuckled on the table. He refused to look at me. He stared straight ahead at the empty judge's bench as if he were waiting for a firing squad. Vanessa, however, was looking right at me. She wore a cream-colored blouse and a modest skirt, her hair swept back in a way that highlighted her high cheekbones. It was a carefully curated look, designed to scream martyr. Her eyes did not hold anger, at least not the kind she showed when we were alone in the kitchen. Instead, they held a performative mixture of pity and disappointment, the kind that begged the gallery to wonder how she had tried so hard with a stepdaughter who turned out so rotten. It was the same look she had mastered over the last 9 years, the one that usually made me shrink into myself and apologize for existing. But not today. For my entire life, or at least the part of it that mattered since my mother died, I had been conditioned to be the girl who kept the peace. I was the one who swallowed insults like bitter pills, the one who apologized when someone else stepped on my foot. The narrative had always been clear. Elena is sensitive. Elena is difficult. Elena just needs to adjust. I had spent nearly a decade bending over backward to fit into the narrow space Vanessa allowed me in my own home, terrified of being the troublemaker who ruined the family dynamic. The irony was bitter on my tongue. Today, I was finally doing exactly what they always feared. I was making a scene, but for the first time in history, I was not here as the mess they had to clean up. I was here as the one holding the broom. My lawyer, Rachel Hines, was already seated, arranging a stack of files with the precision of a surgeon preparing for a transplant. Rachel was a sharp-edged woman in her 50s from the Harbor Line Legal Group, a firm known for eating bullies for breakfast. She did not look like the local attorneys who spent half their time golfing with the judges. She looked like she was ready for war. She glanced at me as I pulled out my chair, her eyes scanning my face for any sign of hesitation. Her hand paused over a thick manila folder. "You are sure about this, Elena?" she asked, her voice low but firm, cutting through the low hum of the courtroom. "Once we open this door, we cannot close it. There is no going back to Sunday dinners after what we are about to do." I looked down at my hands. They were steady, which surprised me. I thought about the Sunday dinners she mentioned. I thought about the silence, the passive-aggressive comments about my career, the way my father would stare at his plate while Vanessa rewrote our family history one anecdote at a time. "I am sure," I said. The words felt foreign, heavy, but right. I turned my head slightly to scan the gallery behind me. The wooden benches were filled with curious neighbors, people I had known since kindergarten, and a few local reporters who sensed blood in the water. But my eyes landed on the only person who mattered. Sitting in the third row, dressed in a charcoal wool coat that had seen better decades, was my grandmother, Evelyn Brooks. She sat apart from the others, an island of silence in the sea of whispers. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her hands were resting on her lap, tightly clutching her old leather handbag. That bag was scuffed at the corners and worn at the handles, but she held it with a reverence usually reserved for holy scriptures. I knew what was inside that bag, or at least, I knew the weight of it. Evelyn caught my eye and gave a barely perceptible nod. It was not a smile. This was not a happy occasion. It was an acknowledgement, a signal that the troops were in position. The murmuring in the room grew louder as the opposing counsel stood up to arrange his papers. He was a slick man with a tan that looked unnatural for November in Colorado, the kind of lawyer Mark and Vanessa would have hired because he promised quick results and aggressive tactics. I could hear snippets of his conversation with his assistant, intentionally loud enough for the front rows to hear. "Ungrateful," he muttered, shaking his head theatrically while gesturing vaguely in my direction. "Typical case of entitlement. You raise them, you house them, and the moment you need peace, they try to kick you to the curb." The crowd behind me rippled with hushed agreement. I could feel their judgment pressing against my back like a physical weight. To them, the story was simple. Here was Mark Brooks, a local man who had worked at the hardware distribution center for 30 years, and his devoted wife, Vanessa. And here was his daughter, the one who had moved away to the city, failed, came crawling back, and was now suing them over a house she did not pay for. It was a classic tale of a greedy millennial versus hardworking parents. I let them whisper, I let them stare, because they did not know about the trash bag. My mind flashed back to that night. Just 3 weeks ago, it felt like a lifetime. I could almost smell the rotting vegetable peels and stale coffee grounds. I could feel the bite of the winter wind cutting through my thin sweater as I hauled the heavy black bag toward the curb. I remembered the way the bag had snagged, the tear, the spill of dirty water onto the pristine concrete of the garage floor. It was such a small thing, a spill, a mistake. But I remembered the sound of the door flying open. I remembered the look on Vanessa's face. Not annoyance, but pure, unadulterated malice. I remembered the sting of her palm connecting with my cheek, the sound of the slap echoing off the garage walls like a gunshot. I remembered the shock of hitting the ground, the cold seeping into my knees, and the way my father had stood there, watching, doing absolutely nothing. That slap had woken me up. For years. I had been sleepwalking through their abuse, telling myself it was not that bad, telling myself I was overreacting. But when I looked up from that cold floor and saw my grandmother standing in the doorway, witnessing my humiliation, something inside me shattered. And when she asked that question, that simple, terrifying question, the pieces did not go back together the same way. They reassembled into a weapon. I blinked, bringing myself back to the present. The courtroom was bright, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, across the aisle. Vanessa leaned over to whisper something to Mark. She placed a hand on his arm, a gesture of comfort for the audience to see. Then, she turned her head and locked eyes with me again. She smiled. It was a tiny, imperceptible curling of her lips. It was a smile that said, "You are going to lose. You always lose. You are just a child playing pretend in a grown-up world." She thought this was about a property dispute. She thought this was about money, or a room to sleep in, or simple petty revenge. She thought she was the protagonist of this story, the besieged mother figure defending her castle against the barbarian stepdaughter. I took a slow, deep breath, filling my lungs with the stale courthouse air. "Look at me. Vanessa," I thought, projecting the words across the aisle. "Look at me closely, because this is the last time you are going to see the victim you created." The side door opened, and the bailiff's voice boomed through the room, cutting off the whispers like a knife. "All rise." The scraping of chairs against the floor was deafening as the entire room stood in unison. The Honorable Judge Miller walked in, her black robes billowing slightly. She was a stern-faced woman, known for her intolerance of courtroom theatrics, which gave me a sliver of hope. She climbed the steps to the bench and sat down, arranging her glasses on the bridge of her nose before looking out at us. She looked at the defense table. She looked at the plaintiff's table. Her gaze lingered on me for a second longer than I expected. "Be seated," she commanded. We sat, The silence in the room was absolute now. The tension was so thick, it felt like the air pressure had dropped 10 points. Even the air conditioning vent seemed to hold its breath. Judge Miller opened the file in front of her. She adjusted her microphone, the sound crackling briefly through the speakers. We are here today to hear the matter of Brooks versus Brooks, regarding the title and ownership dispute of the property located at 4209 Oak Creek Lane. She began. Her voice was dry, devoid of the emotion that was strangling everyone else in the room. She looked up over her glasses, her eyes hard and direct. This court understands that there are significant familial emotions involved in this case, she continued. However, let me be clear from the outset. This court is not a family therapy session. We are not here to discuss feelings. We are here to determine facts. She paused, and her next words seemed to hang in the air, vibrating with a significance that only 3 people in the room truly understood. The primary objective of these proceedings, Judge Miller stated, emphasizing every syllable, is to determine, based on the evidence provided, who is the singular, legal, and rightful owner of the residence in question. A chill ran down my spine. It was almost exactly what Grandma Evelyn had asked that night in the kitchen, her voice trembling with rage and sorrow. Whose house is this? Grandma had asked it as a moral challenge. The judge was asking it as a legal mandate. I glanced at the bag in Grandma's lap one last time. I looked at the back of Vanessa's perfectly styled head. The answer, I thought, my heart pounding a rhythm against my ribs, is going to destroy you. Judge Miller banged her gavel once, a sharp, wooden crack that signaled the beginning of the end. Opening statements, she ordered. Rachel stood up beside me. She buttoned her jacket, picked up her notepad, and walked toward the center of the room. She did not look back at me. She did not need to. We had already stepped off the ledge. The only thing left to do was to see who would survive the fall. As I sat there in the courtroom, listening to Rachel outline the preliminary facts, the sterile smell of the judicial chamber faded away. In its place came the cloying, overpowering scent of lavender and expensive cleaning chemicals. It was the smell of Vanessa. It was the smell of erasure. My mind drifted back 9 years, to the year I turned 18. That was the year the timeline of my life split into 2 distinct eras. There was the before, which was filled with the soft, cluttered warmth of my mother, and there was the after, which was sharp, beige, and curated by Vanessa. My mother had passed away from cancer just 14 months before Vanessa walked through our front door with a suitcase full of designer clothes and a plan to renovate our lives. In the small town of Windermere, grieving periods were public property. The neighbors watched the house with sympathetic eyes, bringing casseroles and whispering about how poor Mark was coping. But when Mark stopped coping and started dating Vanessa less than a year later, the sympathy turned to judgment. The timeline was too tight. The grief was too fresh. People whispered that he had moved on with indecent speed, that he was trying to plug a hole in his heart with a woman who was nothing like the one he had lost. They were right. Vanessa was nothing like my mother. My mother was warmth and flour on her apron. Vanessa was ice and dry cleaning tags. She did not storm into my life with a raised hand or a scream. That would have been easier to deal with because you can report a bruise. You can point to a scream. Vanessa was far more insidious. She came in with a smile that looked painted on and a toolkit of verbal scalpels that she used to surgically remove my confidence, piece by piece. I remember the first time I realized that I was no longer a resident in my own home, but merely a guest who had overstayed her welcome. It was a Tuesday evening. About 3 months after they got married, I was sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by college brochures. I had good grades, solid extracurriculars, and a dream of studying data science at a university 3 hours away. Vanessa glided into the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of white wine. She leaned over my shoulder, her perfume clouding my senses. State University, she hummed, reading the glossy pamphlet. Well, that is certainly a practical choice. Elena. I looked up, feeling a flicker of pride. It is a good program. Of course it is, she said, taking a sip. Her voice was smooth, like velvet wrapped around a razor blade. It is perfect for someone like you. Not everyone is cut out for the pressure of the top-tier schools. Your father and I agree that you would probably crumble under that kind of stress. It is better to aim for the middle. It is safer there." She patted my shoulder, a gesture that felt less like affection and more like she was brushing lint off a jacket. I stared at the brochure, the excitement draining out of me. She had framed it as support, as parental concern, but the subtext was clear. "You are mediocre. We expect nothing from you." That was her method. She never insulted me directly. She simply reframed reality until I felt small. When I bought a dress for prom, she told me it was brave of me to wear that color with my complexion. When I got a promotion at my part-time job, she asked if it was because they were short-staffed. She constantly planted the idea that I was a burden, a heavy, unpolished stone that she and my father were graciously dragging along. And my father let it happen. That is the part that hurts more than Vanessa's cruelty. Mark Brooks, the man who used to carry me on his shoulders and read me bedtime stories, had turned into a ghost in his own living room. He wanted peace. He wanted a clean house, a hot dinner, and a wife who did not yell. If the price of that peace was his daughter's self-esteem, he was willing to pay it. Whenever I tried to talk to him, to tell him that Vanessa's comments hurt, he would sigh the heavy sigh of a man who just wanted to watch the news. "You are being sensitive. Elena," he would say, refusing to make eye contact. "Vanessa is just trying to help. She wants the best for you. Do not make a mountain out of a molehill. Do not be difficult." Difficult. That was the word that sealed my fate. To be difficult was to be unlovable. So I learned to be quiet. The house changed along with the dynamic. It happened slowly. Then all at once, the 3-bedroom suburban home where I had taken my first steps began to shed its skin. The cozy, mismatched furniture my mother had loved was hauled away by a donation truck. In its place came sleek, modern leather sofas that were too cold to sit on comfortably. The walls, once a warm yellow, were painted a variation of gray that Vanessa called mist, but I called prison. The worst part was the photos. One afternoon, I came home from school to find the hallway bare. The timeline of my childhood, the camping trips, the birthday parties, the candid shots of my mother laughing, was gone. I found Vanessa in the living room, hanging a piece of abstract metal art. "Where are the pictures?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Oh, they were just so cluttered. Sweetie," she said without turning around. "The frames were mismatched, and the glass was dusty. I put them in a box in the attic. This looks much more open, does it not? It looks like a fresh start." For her, maybe. For me, it looked like an eviction. It was no longer our house. It was, as she constantly phrased it, Dad and Vanessa's house. My room remained, but even that felt temporary. She would make comments about how she could not wait to turn it into a guest room or a home gym once I finally launched, as she put it. My grandmother, Evelyn, would visit once a month. She would drive her old sedan over from her small apartment across town, bringing cookies that Vanessa would politely decline and then throw away the moment Evelyn left. Grandma saw things. I knew she did. She saw the way I shrank when Vanessa entered the room. She saw the way the house had been sanitized of my mother's memory, but she stayed silent. At the time, I resented her for it. I wanted her to scream, to fight, to throw the abstract metal art through the window. But Evelyn belonged to a generation that believed you did not interfere in a man's marriage, especially not your son's. She looked at me, saw an 18-year-old young woman who was about to leave for college, and calculated that I could survive this. She thought I was an adult who could fend for herself. She did not realize that you never stop needing a parent to protect you, no matter how old you get. So she sat on the uncomfortable gray sofa, drank her tea, and asked me about school. She kept the peace, just like my father, just like me. Escape came in the form of an acceptance letter. I went to university, and for 4 years, I breathed free air. I excelled. I proved Vanessa's aim for the middle theory wrong by graduating with I in honors. I landed a job at Northwave Insights, a data analysis firm in the city. It was demanding work, requiring logic, pattern recognition, and a sharp eye for detail, skills I would later use to dismantle my own family. I moved into a small apartment near my office. I paid my own bills. I built a life that did not smell of lavender and judgment. But guilt is a powerful tether. I still went back for holidays. I still went back for birthdays. I went back because I missed my father, even though the man I missed barely existed anymore. Those visits were performances. Vanessa loved to play the role of the doting stepmother for the neighbors. We would stand on the porch, and if Mrs. Gable next door walked by, Vanessa would link her arm through mine, her grip tight enough to bruise. "Elena is doing so well," she would call out, her voice pitching up an octave. "We are just so proud that she is finally finding her footing. It took a while, but she is getting there." She made it sound like I was a recovering addict or a delinquent, rather than a successful data analyst. If I tried to correct her, if I said, "Actually, I just got a promotion," she would laugh a tinkling, dismissive laugh. "Oh, Elena, always bragging. No one likes a show-off. Dear." So I learned to smile and nod. I let her paint me as the struggling, slightly unstable daughter. It was easier than fighting. It was easier than seeing my father look at his shoes. But there was one conversation that stuck with me, a conversation that I buried deep in my subconscious until recently. It happened 2 years ago, during a Thanksgiving visit. I was in the kitchen, helping, or rather, being supervised, as I dried the dishes. Mark was in the living room watching football. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the dishwasher and the distant cheers from the TV. Vanessa was wiping down the granite countertops, obsessively checking for streaks. She stopped and looked out the window at the backyard, where the old oak tree my grandfather had planted stood tall against the gray sky. "You know," she said casually, not looking at me, "we are thinking of putting in a pool next year, right where that old tree is." I frowned. "Grandpa Arthur planted that tree. Grandma loves it." Vanessa shrugged, turning to face me. She leaned back against the counter, crossing her arms. "Well, Evelyn is not going to be around forever, is she? And let us be honest, Elena, once she passes, things will be different." I stopped drying the plate in my hand. "What do you mean?" She smiled, that same pitying smile she wore in the courtroom today. "I mean that Mark and I have plans for this property. It is our asset. After all, when your grandmother is gone, there will be no one to get sentimental about old trees or dusty attics. This house is going to be fully ours, legally and completely. So do not get any ideas about holding on to the past, or holding on to anything, really." She paused, letting the words sink in. "You have your own life. Elena, this place? This is for me and your father. Do not delude yourself into thinking you have a claim here just because you grew up in this zip code." At the time, I thought she was just being her usual territorial self. I thought she was just marking her ground, reminding me that I was an outsider. I brushed it off as malice. I did not realize it was a confession. I did not realize that the specific phrasing, "when your grandmother is gone, this house is going to be fully ours," was odd. Why would Grandma's death make the house fully theirs? The deed was supposed to be in my father's name. My mother's name had been removed years ago. Grandma Evelyn lived across town in a rental apartment. She had no claim on this house. Or so I thought. I let the comment slide. I went back to my apartment, back to my data spreadsheets, and forgot about it. I did not know that Vanessa had just handed me the first piece of the puzzle. I did not know that in her arrogance, in her need to make me feel disinherited, she had hinted at a legal reality that she was desperately trying to hide. She had planted a seed of doubt. It lay dormant in the dark soil of my memory for 2 years. It waited for the right conditions to sprout. It waited for a slap in a cold garage. It waited for a grandmother to stand in a doorway and ask a question that would shatter the silence we had all been living in. I looked at Vanessa across the courtroom aisle. She was whispering to her lawyer, looking confident, looking like the queen of the castle. She had spent 9 years rewriting the past, painting over the walls, throwing away the photos, and gaslighting me into submission. She thought she had erased everything. But she forgot one thing. I was a data analyst. My entire career was built on finding the anomalies in the system, and looking back now, with the clarity of a woman who has nothing left to lose, I realized that her confidence was not strength, it was a cover-up. She was not just mean, she was scared, and she had been scared since the day she walked in. The judge cleared her throat, bringing the room back to order. I sat up straighter. The memory of the scared 18-year-old girl faded, replaced by the cold resolve of the 27-year-old woman who knew exactly what that house was worth, not in dollars, but in truth. The past had been distorted, yes, but the future? The future was about to be corrected. The unraveling of my life began, as so many tragedies do, with a spreadsheet. Specifically, a spreadsheet in an email from Human Resources at Northwave Insights titled Restructuring and Redundancy Notification. In the span of a 20-minute Zoom call, I went from a rising senior data analyst to a statistic. I was part of the 12% of the workforce being shed to improve the quarterly margins. Losing my job was a blow to my ego, but losing my independence was a blow to my soul. My severance package was meager, barely enough to cover 2 months of rent in the city. And with the job market freezing up, I had to make the choice that every millennial dreads. I had to go back. Moving back into the house on Oak Creek Lane felt less like a homecoming and more like a surrender. I was 27 years old, carrying my life in cardboard boxes, walking back into a bedroom that Vanessa had already half converted into a yoga studio. She had cleared out my old bookshelf to make room for a rack of expensive mats and foam rollers that I never saw her use. Vanessa did not welcome me. She tolerated me. She treated my presence like a fungal infection, something unpleasant that had to be endured until it could be scrubbed away. "You know," she said the morning after I arrived, leaning against the kitchen island with her green smoothie, "it is funny, really. You spent all those years acting like you were too good for this town, too good for us, and yet, look where you ended up. You always come crawling back to cling to this house, do you not? It is like a crutch for you." I bit my tongue. I swallowed the rage that tasted like copper in my mouth. I told myself it was temporary. I just needed to save money, find a new position, and get out. I spent my days in the local library applying for jobs just to avoid her, and my nights in my room, trying to be invisible. But invisibility is impossible when someone is actively hunting for your flaws. The night it happened was a Tuesday. It was late, almost 11 at night. I had been glued to my laptop, tweaking my resume for a remote position based in Seattle, when the realization hit me like a physical jolt. It was trash night. The truck came at 6 in the morning, and if the bins were not on the curb, Vanessa would have enough ammunition to lecture me for a week about my irresponsibility and lack of gratitude. I scrambled out of bed, throwing on a thin hoodie over my pajamas. I hurried to the kitchen, grabbed the heavy black bag from the bin, and headed for the door leading to the garage. My mind was elsewhere. I was thinking about cover letters and salary expectations. I was not thinking about the structural integrity of a cheap plastic bag. As I stepped down into the garage, the bag snagged on the metal striker of the doorframe. It was a small tear, barely an inch, but gravity did the rest. As I swung the bag up to carry it to the large bins, a stream of foul-smelling liquid, coffee grounds, vegetable rot, and something unidentifiable, leaked out. It splattered onto the floor. To anyone else, this would have been a minor annoyance, a grab-a-paper towel moment, but to Vanessa, who had insisted on coating the garage floor in a pristine showroom-quality epoxy finish just 2 months ago, this was a declaration of war. I froze, watching the dark puddle spread on the shiny gray surface. "What did you do?" The voice came from the doorway behind me. It was not a question, it was an accusation. I turned around. Vanessa was standing there in her silk robe, her arms crossed, her face contorted into a mask of pure disgust. She looked at the floor, then at me, as if I had just slaughtered a puppy. "I am so sorry," I stammered, dropping the bag into the bin. The bag ripped. "I will clean it up right now. I will get the hose and the soap. It will be fine." "You did that on purpose," she hissed, stepping into the garage. Her bare feet slapped against the cold concrete. What? No, of course not. It was an accident. Vanessa. Do not lie to me. Her voice rose to a shriek that bounced off the metal garage door. You are jealous. You are jealous that we fixed this place up. You cannot stand that this is not your dusty little childhood home anymore. You want to ruin everything we build because you are a failure who cannot even keep a job. The venom in her words stunned me. It was so disproportionate to the situation. I stepped back, holding my hands up. Vanessa, please, I'm going to clean it. Stop yelling. She did not stop. She closed the distance between us, her eyes wild. I had never seen her like this. Usually, her abuse was cold and calculated, delivered with a smile. This was hot. This was unhinged. You are a parasite, she spat, getting right in my face. You come here. You eat our food. You use our electricity. And you destroy our property. You are useless. Elena, useless. She lunged. It happened so fast my brain could barely process it. She raised her hand and struck me across the face. It was not a theatrical slap. It was a hard, brutal blow with the heel of her hand that caught me on the cheekbone. The force of it sent me stumbling backward. My foot slipped in the puddle of trash water, and I went down hard, my back slamming against the rough drywall of the garage. Pain exploded in my face and radiated down my spine. I gasped, clutching my cheek, looking up at her in absolute shock. I was 27 years old. I was a grown woman, and my stepmother had just hit me. Vanessa stood over me, breathing hard, her hand still raised. For a second, she looked surprised by her own violence. Then, her expression hardened into something terrifyingly smug. Get up, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Do not act like a victim. You slipped. Vanessa. My father's voice came from the kitchen doorway. Mark was standing there, wearing his pajamas, looking sleep-rumbled and confused. He looked at me on the floor, clutching my face. He looked at Vanessa, who was standing over me like a predator. He saw it. I knew he saw it. He saw the red mark blooming on my cheek. He saw the fear in my eyes. Dad, I choked out, tears stinging my eyes. Dad, she hit me. Mark looked at Vanessa. Vanessa looked at Mark, daring him to speak. Mark shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. He looked at the trash on the floor. He looked anywhere but at me. Vanessa, honey, he said, his voice weak, pleading. Stop it. Just stop. That was it. Stop it. Just stop. He did not rush to help me up. He did not scream at her to get away from his daughter. He stood there, impotent and cowardly, trying to de-escalate the situation so he could go back to sleep. The betrayal hit me harder than the slap. My father, the man who was supposed to be my shield, had just watched his wife assault me and decided that the best course of action was a mild suggestion. I pulled myself up, my legs shaking. My hands were sticky with the garbage water. I felt dirty. I felt small. You are pathetic, I whispered to him. Vanessa laughed, a sharp, barking sound. Get out, she said. Get out of my garage. Get out of my house. Before I could respond, the garage was flooded with a sudden, rhythmic flashing of red and blue light. The colors danced across the white walls, illuminating the scene in a chaotic strobe effect. We all froze. The sound of a car door slamming outside broke the silence. Someone called the police, Mark said, his face draining of color. It was Mrs. Kerr next door. It had to be. She was an insomniac who watched the neighborhood like a hawk. She must have heard the screaming, or maybe she saw the struggle through the small garage windows. Vanessa's face transformed instantly. The rage vanished, replaced by a look of panicked calculation. She looked at me, then at the door. When the heavy garage door rolled up, revealing 2 uniformed officers standing in the driveway, Vanessa was already crying. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. She collapsed against Mark, burying her face in his shoulder, her body shaking with manufactured sobs. "Officer! Thank God!" she wailed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She just went crazy." I tried to talk to her about her aggressive behavior, And she attacked me. She pushed me. Look at the mess she made. I stood there, stunned into silence. The officers walked in, their hands resting near their belts, their eyes scanning the scene. They saw the trash on the floor. They saw me, disheveled, dirty, with a red mark on my face, but they also saw a hysterical middle-aged woman clinging to her husband, claiming to be the victim. "Ma'am, step back," the taller officer said to me, his voice stern. "No. Wait," I said, my voice cracking. "That is not what happened. She hit me. Look at my face." "She hit herself," Vanessa sobbed, louder now. "She is unstable. She lost her job, and she has been taking it out on us. Mark, tell them how difficult she has been." The officer looked at my father. "Sir, did you witness the altercation?" I looked at my dad. This was his chance. This was the moment he could redeem himself. All he had to do was tell the truth. Mark looked at the police. He looked at his weeping wife. He looked at me, his daughter, standing alone on the cold concrete. He swallowed hard. It was all a blur. "Officer," he muttered, his voice barely audible. There was a lot of shouting. Elena was very upset. He did not lie directly, but he did not tell the truth. He validated her narrative by omission. He threw me to the wolves. The officer turned to me, his expression hardening. "Ma'am, I need you to step outside. We need to separate the parties." I felt like the world was tilting on its axis. I was being treated like the aggressor in the house I grew up in. I walked out onto the driveway, the cold night air biting at my skin. The neighbors were watching from behind their curtains. I was the spectacle. I was the disgrace. And then, a car pulled up to the curb. It was an old, rattling Buick that I recognized instantly. Grandma Evelyn got out. She moved faster than I had seen her move in years. She was wearing her heavy wool coat over her nightgown, her silver hair loose around her shoulders. She must have been playing cards at Mrs. Kerr's house. They had a standing game on Tuesday nights. Mrs. Kerr must have called her the second she called the police. Evelyn marched up the driveway. Ignoring the police tape that the second officer was half-heartedly holding, she walked right past Mark, who was standing near the garage door looking like he wanted to disappear. She walked right up to me. She took my face in her hands. Her hands were warm and rough. She tilted my head to the side, examining the angry red welt on my cheek. Then she looked down at my hands, stained with the filth from the trash bag. She did not ask if I was okay. She knew I was not. She turned around to face the garage. Vanessa had stopped crying the moment she saw Evelyn. Now, Vanessa stood there, looking defiant, wiping her dry eyes. The officer stepped forward. "Ma'am, this is a police matter. You need to step back." Evelyn ignored him. She looked at Mark. Then she looked at Vanessa. Her eyes were like flint. I was kneeling on the ground, shivering, feeling like I had lost everything. My job, my dignity, my father. Evelyn's voice cut through the night air. It was not loud, but it carried the weight of a judge's gavel. She pointed at the house that had been repainted gray, the house that had new furniture, the house that I had been told, over and over again, belonged to Mark and Vanessa. "If this house is mine," she said, enunciating every single word with terrifying clarity, "then why is my granddaughter being kicked out of it like a squatter?" The silence that followed was absolute. The police officer stopped writing in his notebook. Mark's mouth fell open. Vanessa's face went from smug to pale in the span of a heartbeat. "What?" Vanessa whispered, her voice trembling for real this time. Evelyn did not repeat herself. She did not have to. She looked at the officer. "I want to file a report," she said calmly. "My granddaughter has been assaulted in my home, and I want these people," she gestured vaguely at Mark and Vanessa, "removed from the premises if they cannot behave." The officer looked confused. "Ma'am, the deed. The homeowners are listed as Mark and Vanessa Brooks." Evelyn reached into her purse. She did not pull out a document. She simply pulled out a set of keys, old keys, brass keys that looked like they hadn't been used in a decade. "We will see about that," Evelyn said. The police did not arrest anyone that night. It was a domestic dispute with conflicting stories, and Mark refused to press charges against me, playing the benevolent father. They wrote a report. They took photos of my face. They told us to cool off. But as I stood there in the driveway, watching the police lights fade into the distance, I realized that the dynamic had shifted. Vanessa was staring at Evelyn with a mixture of fear and confusion. Mark was staring at the ground, and I was standing up. I wiped the dirt off my hands onto my pajama pants. The sting on my cheek was still there, throbbing in time with my heartbeat, but the shame was gone. It had been replaced by something cold and hard. I looked at Vanessa. She was not the queen of the castle anymore. She was a usurper who had just been noticed by the true monarch. "I am not leaving," I said to her. Vanessa opened her mouth to speak, to spew more venom, but she looked at Evelyn and closed it again. I walked back into the house. I walked past my father without looking at him. I went to my room, and for the first time in months, I did not feel like a guest. I felt like a detective at a crime scene, and I knew exactly where the bodies were buried. The morning after the incident with the trash bag and the police, I packed a single suitcase. I did not pack everything I owned, just enough to survive a few weeks. I took my laptop, my few remaining suits from my corporate life, and the small jewelry box my mother had left me. I walked out of the house on Oak Creek Lane without saying a word to my father or Vanessa. They were in the kitchen, drinking coffee as if the night before had been a bad dream that vanished with the sunrise. I did not look at them. I could not. If I had looked at my father, I might have screamed, and I was done screaming. I went to Maya Collins's apartment. Maya had been my best friend since the 7th grade, the kind of friend who picks up on the first ring and knows you are crying before you say a hello. She lived in a small, exposed brick studio in downtown Riverton, the kind of place that smelled of roasted coffee and old books. It was cramped, but it felt safer than the sprawling suburban house I had just left. For 2 days, I did nothing but sleep and stare at the ceiling. The red mark on my face faded to a dull yellow bruise, but the humiliation burned as bright as ever. I felt like a failure. I was 27 years old, unemployed, homeless, and apparently the family villain. Then came the text from Grandma Evelyn. "Meet me at the Roasted Bean. Noon, come alone." The Roasted Bean was an old diner on the edge of town, the kind of place that had not changed its menu since 1985. When I walked in, the bell above the door jingled, a cheerful sound that felt jarring against my mood. I found Evelyn in a booth at the back, far away from the windows. She was wearing a structured coat and a silk scarf, looking every inch the matriarch, but her hands were trembling slightly as she held her teacup. She did not waste time with pleasantries. She did not ask how my face was. She simply slid a manila envelope across the scratched formica table. "It is time you saw this," she said, her voice low. I looked at the envelope. It was old. The paper was soft at the corners, and there was a faint coffee ring stain on the front. I opened it carefully, pulling out a single sheet of paper. It was a photocopy, grainy and gray, but the handwriting was unmistakable. It was jagged, forceful, and slanted to the right. It was my grandfather Arthur's handwriting. I read the document. It was short, written in plain language, not legalese. It was dated 6 months before he died. I, Arthur Brooks, being of sound mind, hereby leave the property at 4209 Oak Creek Lane to my granddaughter, Elena Brooks. Ownership shall transfer to her fully upon her 25th birthday. This home is to be her sanctuary. It is not to be sold for investment or speculation. It is to remain in the family. I read it twice, then a third time. The noise of the diner, the clatter of plates, the hiss of the espresso machine, faded into a dull buzz. "This," I stammered, my throat dry. "This says the house is mine." Evelyn nodded, her eyes fixed on my face. "But Dad said," Vanessa said. I trailed off. My brain was trying to reconcile two opposing realities. For the last decade, I had been told that the house was my father's asset. I had been told I was a guest, I had been told I was lucky to have a roof over my head. But according to this piece of paper, I had owned the roof since I turned 25. That was 2 years ago. Why am I just seeing this now? I asked, looking up at her. Why did nobody tell me? Evelyn sighed, a sound that seemed to carry years of regret. Because that is just a photocopy. Elena, it is not the legal original. She took a sip of her tea, her hand steadying the cup. Arthur did not trust your father with money. You know that. Mark has a good heart, or he used to, but he is weak, and he has always been terrible with finances. Arthur knew that if Mark got the house, he would leverage it, mortgage it, or lose it. So he wrote this. He wanted to bypass Mark entirely to make sure you always had a home. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice. He gave the original to Harold Pierce. The name rang a bell, but a distant one. Harold Pierce? The family lawyer? Yes, he handled everything for us back then. Arthur gave him the original will for safekeeping. He told Harold not to release it until you turned 25. I frowned. So what happened? Why didn't Harold call me 2 years ago? Evelyn's expression darkened. Harold went bankrupt. Elena, about 5 years ago, his firm collapsed overnight. There were rumors of gambling debts, mismanagement, and then, a week after the bankruptcy filing, his storage facility, the one where he kept all the client files, burned to the ground. I felt a chill run down my spine. A fire. It sounded too cinematic, too convenient. Everything was lost. Evelyn continued, or so we were told. Mark told me that the will was destroyed in the fire. He said that since the original was gone, the property defaulted to the next of kin, which was him. He said there was nothing we could do. She reached across the table and tapped the photocopy. I found this in Arthur's old desk last week. I had forgotten he made a copy. But a copy is not enough to walk into a bank and demand a deed. That is why I stayed quiet. I thought as long as Mark was taking care of the house, it was fine. I thought eventually he would do the right thing. She looked away, her jaw tightening. But then Vanessa moved in. And then I saw how they treated you. And then I saw him stand there and watch her hit you. She looked back at me, her eyes fierce. There is something else, Elena. Something that has kept me awake for nights. What? I asked. A few days before the fire, Mark and Vanessa went to see Harold Pierce. I froze. Why? Mark told me they went to discuss estate planning. He said they wanted to make sure their own wills were in order, but when they came back, Mark was different. He was nervous, jumping at shadows. And Vanessa? Vanessa was triumphant. She started talking about renovations that very week. She started talking about her house. I sat back in the booth, my mind racing. The timeline was damning. My grandfather dies. The will is with a lawyer. The lawyer goes bankrupt. My father and stepmother visit him. A fire destroys the records. My father inherits the house. It was not just bad luck. It was a sequence. I took the photocopy and folded it carefully, sliding it back into the envelope. We need to prove it, I said. Evelyn nodded. That is why I gave it to you. I am an old woman. Elena, I can shout at them in the driveway, but I cannot fight a legal battle. You can. You are the data analyst. You find patterns. Find the pattern here. I left the diner with the envelope burning a hole in my bag. I went straight back to Maya's apartment. Maya was a paralegal at a mid-sized firm, and while she wasn't a lawyer yet, she knew the bureaucratic labyrinth of the county better than anyone. I laid it all out for her, the slap, the police, the photocopy, the fire. Maya sat on her floor, cross-legged, reading the photocopy while eating a bagel. She did not look surprised. She looked focused. Okay, she said, wiping crumbs from her lip. This is huge. But Grandma is right. A photocopy is hearsay. We need a paper trail. If the house transferred to your dad, there has to be a deed transfer recorded at the county clerk's office. But wouldn't that just show he inherited it? I asked. Maybe, Maya said, eyes narrowing. Or maybe it shows something else. Property transfers are public record. Elena, if they pulled a fast one, they had to file paperwork to make it legal. And criminals, even family ones, usually mess up the paperwork. We went to the county clerk's office the next morning. It was a drab, windowless building in the basement of the courthouse complex. The air smelled of dust and printer toner. Rows of metal filing cabinets stretched into the gloom, and the fluorescent lights buzzed like angry insects. Maya navigated the room like a pro. She led me to a computer terminal that looked like it was running software from the 90s. "Okay, search the address," she commanded. I typed in 4209 Oak Creek Lane. The screen flickered, green text scrolling down. There were several entries: the original purchase by Arthur Brooks in 1972, a refinancing in 1990, and then the most recent transfer. I clicked on it. Date of transfer: October 14th, 2018. Grantor: Estate of Arthur Brooks. Grantee: Mark Brooks and Vanessa Brooks. Type of deed: quitclaim. "Wait," I said, leaning closer. "Look at the date. October 14th. That was 5 years ago." I pulled out my phone and searched for the news story about Harold Pierce's office fire. I had looked it up the night before. Local fire marshals investigate blaze at storage facility. Date: October 21st, 2018. They transferred the deed 1 week before the fire, I whispered. "That means they didn't wait for the will to be destroyed," Maya said, her voice low. "They transferred it while the will still theoretically existed. How did they do that?" I looked at the value of the transfer. Consideration amount: $10. They bought a $300,000 house for $10. "That is standard for family transfers," Maya said, frowning. "But usually, you need the executor of the estate to sign off." Who was the executor? I looked at the screen. Executor: Mark Brooks. Of course, I muttered. Dad was the executor. So he signed the house over to himself and his new wife for $10, ignoring the will that said it went to me. But he couldn't just ignore the will. Maya argued, the probate court has to see the will to approve the executor's actions, unless he told the court there was no will. I finished. Intestate succession. If there is no will, the property goes to the son. So he lied to the probate court, Maya said. That is fraud. Elena, that is felony fraud. We stood there, staring at the glowing green screen. The reality of it was sinking in. This was not just about my stepmother being mean. This was not just about my father being weak. This was a calculated, criminal act. They had stolen my inheritance, lied to the government, and then spent the next 5 years gaslighting me into thinking I was a burden for existing in a house that I actually owned. "Excuse me. Ladies?" I jumped. An older man was standing behind us. He was wearing a cardigan that had seen better days and a lanyard that identified him as Mr. Henderson, senior clerk. He had thick glasses and a face that looked like a crumpled map. "I saw you looking at the Brooks file," he said. His voice was soft, barely a whisper. He looked around the room to make sure no one else was listening. I stiffened. "Is there a problem?" Mr. Henderson adjusted his glasses, not for me, but I remember that transfer. 19 years I've been working these files. You remember the odd ones. He stepped closer, pretending to organize a stack of papers on the desk next to us. "I remember Mark Brooks coming in here." He murmured. He was sweating, nervous, kept checking his watch. He came in with a woman, very sharp dresser. She did all the talking. "Vanessa," I whispered. Mr. Henderson nodded. They were in a rush. They wanted the deed recorded that same day. Usually, that takes a week. But Mark had a letter from the bank. "The bank?" I asked. "Riverstone Community Bank," he said, "the local branch. Mark Brooks is very friendly with the manager there, Mr. Vance. They play golf together. The letter said the bank had approved the transfer and waived the probate waiting period. It was highly irregular, but with a bank letter, my boss pushed it through." He looked me right in the eye. "If I were you," he whispered, "I would look at why a bank manager would help a man bypass probate a week before his lawyer's office burns down." He tapped the desk once, then shuffled away into the shadows of the archives, leaving me standing there with my heart pounding in my throat. I looked at Maya. She looked pale. Elena, she said, this is not just family drama anymore. This involves the bank. If we pull this thread, the whole town might unravel. I said. I looked back at the screen, at the name Vanessa Brooks listed as the owner of my grandfather's house. Let's pull it, I said. I took a picture of the screen with my phone. I had the photocopy of the will. I had the date of the fire. And now, I had a witness who placed them at the scene of the bureaucratic crime. The beatings, the insults, that is not your room anymore. It was all a distraction. They were not just trying to kick me out because they didn't like me. They were kicking me out because I was the only loose end in a perfect crime. And they had just made the mistake of reminding me that I was a data analyst. I closed my eyes for a second, imagining the house, my house. Whose house is this? Grandma asked. It is mine, I thought, and I am coming to collect. The discovery of the deed transfer was the spark, but we needed fuel to build a fire big enough to burn down their lies. We found that fuel in a rusted biscuit tin on the top shelf of my grandmother's closet. Evelyn had called me 2 days after our visit to the county clerk's office. Her voice on the phone sounded breathless, not from exertion, but from the sudden, sharp clarity of a memory long buried. Come over, she had said. I remember the key. When I arrived at her small apartment, she was sitting on the floor of her bedroom, surrounded by old shoeboxes and knitting supplies. In her hand, she held a small, silver key. It was not a house key. It was shorter, thicker, with a number stamped into the metal head. 304, I read aloud. Arthur gave this to me the month before he went into the hospital, she said, running her thumb over the metal. He told me it was for a safety deposit box at Riverstone Community Bank. He said, Evie, if anything happens, and if things get messy, you open box 304. She looked up at me, her eyes wide. I never opened it. Elena, after the funeral, and then Mark taking over, and the grief. I just put the key in this tin and forgot. I assumed whatever was in there had been handled by the lawyers. But the lawyer was Harold Pierce, I said, feeling the adrenaline kick in. And Harold Pierce's office burned down. If Arthur put something in the bank, it might be the only thing that survived. We went to the bank immediately. Walking into Riverstone Community Bank felt like walking into the lion's den. This was the bank where Mr. Vance, the manager who played golf with my father, worked. This was the bank that had waived the probate period to help Mark steal the house. I made Evelyn wear her best hat. I wore my sharpest blazer. We walked in not as a confused old widow and her unemployed granddaughter, but as 2 women who owned the place. We were lucky. Mr. Vance was out to lunch. A young teller, who looked no older than 20, led us to the vault. The air inside the vault was cool and smelled of metallic dust. The teller unlocked his side of box 304, and Evelyn inserted her key. It turned with a heavy, satisfying click. When we pulled the long metal box out and carried it to the private viewing room, my hands were shaking. Open it, Evelyn whispered. I lifted the lid. It was not empty. Inside, resting on the velvet lining, was a thick envelope, a small black velvet pouch, and a chunky gray USB drive, the kind that looked like it belonged in 2010. I opened the envelope first. It was the original will, not a photocopy, not a draft, the original, ink-signed document, with the raised seal of Harold Pierce's notary stamp. It was pristine. It stated, in indisputable legal terms, that the house on Oak Creek Lane was the sole property of Elena Brooks upon her 25th birthday. We got them, I breathed, feeling tears prick my eyes. Grandma, we got them. Evelyn did not smile. She was reaching into the box for the letters. There were 3 of them, written on Arthur's personalized stationery. Read this, she said, handing me one. I unfolded the paper. My grandfather's handwriting was jagged, written with the urgency of a man who knew his time was short. My dearest Elena, the letter began. If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and things have not gone according to plan. I am writing this because I have a heavy heart regarding your father. Mark is my son, and I love him, but he is a man easily led. Since he married Vanessa, I have seen a change in him. He has lost his spine. I fear that when I am gone, she will try to take everything. She does not care about this family's history. She cares about assets. I swallowed hard, a lump forming in my throat. He knew. He had seen it coming a decade ago. I am leaving the house to you because it is the only way I can ensure you always have a sanctuary. The letter continued. Do not let them bully you. Do not let them guilt you. This house is yours. Fight for it. I wiped a tear from my cheek. The validation was overwhelming. For years. Vanessa had called me a parasite. My own grandfather had called me the owner. What is on the drive? Evelyn asked, pointing to the gray USB stick. I do not know, I said, but we need to find out. We took the contents of the box and left the bank as fast as we could, terrified that Mr. Vance would walk in and somehow confiscate everything. We went back to Maya's apartment, where she had a laptop ready. I plugged the drive in. It hummed to life. There were several folders. One was labeled Drafts, another Correspondence, and one simply said Audio. I clicked on Correspondence first. It contained scanned PDFs of Harold Pierce's legal notes. I scrolled through them until I found the date, October 12th, 2018, 2 weeks before the fire. Meeting with Mark and Vanessa Brooks. The note read, Clients requested a revision of Arthur Brooks's will. They want to remove the clause regarding Elena Brooks and transfer the deed directly to Mark. I informed them that this is impossible as the will is already executed and sealed, pending the age requirement. Vanessa Brooks became agitated. She suggested there were ways around it. I refused to participate in any alteration of the document. Maya gasped from behind me. She asked him to commit fraud, and he wrote it down. I opened the audio folder. There was a single file, labeled Feeding 1012 H18 MP3. I turned up the volume on the laptop and pressed play. The audio was crackly, filled with static, like it had been recorded on a phone inside a pocket, but the voices were distinct. Look, Harold, we have known each other a long time, said a voice I knew better than my own. It was my father, but he did not sound like the passive, quiet man I knew. He sounded desperate. We need this assets. The business is struggling. We need the equity in the house. I cannot do it. Mark, a gravelly voice replied. That must have been Harold. The girl gets the house. That is what Arthur wanted. Then, a woman's voice cut in. Sharp, cold, Vanessa. Arthur is dead. Harold. And nobody cares what a dead man wanted. We are the ones living here. We are the ones paying the bills. Make the problem go away. I cannot, Harold insisted. My license. Your license is the least of your worries, my father's voice said, low and threatening. You have a lot of debts. Harold, we know about the gambling. We know about the loans you took from the wrong people. If you do not help us fix this will, maybe the Bar Association finds out about your finances. Maybe you lose everything. The recording ended with a sharp click. The silence in Maya's apartment was deafening. He blackmailed him, I whispered. My father blackmailed his lawyer into changing the will. And when blackmail didn't work, Maya said, her voice shaking. The lawyer's office burned down a week later. I felt sick, physically sick. I had thought my father was a coward who stood by while Vanessa did the dirty work. But this was active malice. He had used Harold's gambling addiction against him. He had threatened a man to steal from his own daughter. I looked at the screen. We had the motive. We had the threat. We had the timeline. We need a lawyer, I said, a real one. The next morning, I walked into the offices of the Harborline Legal Group. It was a glass and steel fortress in the city, a far cry from the dusty office of the county clerk. Rachel Hines met me in a conference room that overlooked the skyline. She was a legend in property law, known for dismantling predatory landlords and scammers. I laid it all out on the polished mahogany table. The original will, the letters, the USB drive, the timeline of the fire, the deed transfer for $10. Rachel listened in silence. She took notes on a yellow legal pad. her face unreadable. When I played the audio recording, she stopped writing. She leaned in, listening to my father's threat. When it finished, she took off her glasses and looked at me. "This is not just a property dispute. Elena," she said, her voice steel, "this is conspiracy. This is fraud. This is elder financial abuse against your grandmother's estate." She picked up the photocopy of the fire report I had included. "If they can prove the fire was arson, this becomes a criminal case with prison time. But even without that, what you have here is a smoking gun. They bypassed probate by lying to the bank and the court, likely claiming the original will was lost or non-existent, while simultaneously pressuring the lawyer who held the proof." She looked me dead in the eye. "But I need you to understand something. People who burn down offices and blackmail lawyers do not play nice. If we file this, they are going to come at you. They are going to try to destroy your reputation before we ever step foot in a courtroom. Are you ready for that?" I thought about the slap in the garage. I thought about Vanessa calling me a parasite. "I am ready," I said. Rachel was right. The backlash started before the ink on the filing was dry. Vanessa did not wait for the court date. She went to the court of public opinion. She started a whisper campaign in the neighborhood that spread like wildfire. I went to the grocery store 3 days later, and Mrs. May, Gable, who had known me since I was 5, turned her cart around in the aisle to avoid me. I heard the whispers in the checkout line. "I heard she is on drugs." A woman whispered, "That is why she lost her job in the city." "Vanessa said she came back demanding money." Another replied, "Said she threatened to burn the house down if they didn't pay her." It was masterful projection. Vanessa was accusing me of exactly what she had done. She painted me as the unstable, greedy, unemployed millennial who was abusing her poor, aging father. She told people I was mentally ill, that I was hallucinating about a secret will. It hurt. It hurt to have people I grew up with look at me with fear and disgust. I wanted to scream the truth at them in the produce section. I wanted to play the audio recording over the store's intercom. But Rachel had told me to stay silent. "Do not engage," she said. "Save it for the judge." So I kept my head down. I bought my milk and bread. I walked out of the store with my dignity barely intact. I went back to Maya's apartment and opened my laptop, ready to distract myself with job applications. That was when I saw the email. It had arrived 10 minutes ago. The subject line was blank. The sender was a name I did not recognize. Jonas Hale. I clicked it open. "Ms. Brooks," the email read. "My name is Jonas. I was Harold Pierce's paralegal 5 years ago. I saw the filing your lawyer made today. It is public record." I held my breath. "I know everyone thinks the fire destroyed everything." The email continued, and for the most part, it did. But Harold was paranoid. He made me keep a backup of his personal notes on an external server, just in case his friends came collecting on his debts. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I have the notes from the day he died. I also have the notes from the day your father and stepmother came in. I have kept them for 5 years because I was afraid. Harold told me that if anything happened to him, I should disappear. But I saw what they are saying about you in the paper. I saw them call you a liar." The cursor blinked at the end of the paragraph. "You are not a liar, and I have the documents to prove it. I am tired of carrying this for them. Tell me where to meet you." I sat back in the chair, the air rushing out of my lungs. Vanessa had the neighborhood gossip. She had the bank manager. She had the lies. But I had the dead lawyer's conscience. I picked up the phone and dialed Rachel. "Do not go home tonight," I told her. "We have a new witness." And for the first time since I knelt on that cold garage floor, I smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a hunter who just heard the trap snap shut. The meeting with Jonas Hale took place in a dive bar called the Rusty Anchor, a place on the edge of town where the floor stuck to your shoes and the lighting was dim enough to hide a guilty conscience. Rachel had arranged it, but she insisted I go alone for the first 10 minutes. She said he needed to see the face of the victim, not the suit of a lawyer, to find his courage. I sat in a booth at the back, nursing a club soda. It was 7 o'clock on a Tuesday. and the place was mostly empty save for a few regulars hunched over their beers. When Jonas walked in, he looked nothing like the confident paralegal I imagined. He was a thin man in his late 30s, wearing a windbreaker that was 2 sizes too big and nervously adjusting his glasses every 4 seconds. He looked like a man who had spent the last 5 years looking over his shoulder. He spotted me and hesitated. For a second, I thought he was going to bolt. I stood up, trying to look less like an adversary and more like someone who just needed help. "Jonas?" I asked softly. He nodded, sliding into the booth opposite me. He did not take off his coat. "I should not be here," he said, his voice jumping. "If they find out I'm talking to you—" "Who is they?" "Jonas?" I asked. "My father? Vanessa?" He flinched at the names. "You do not understand. Ms. Brooks, your father. He is desperate. But your stepmother? She is dangerous. I saw what she did to Harold. She did not lift a finger, but she broke him. She broke him down until he was willing to burn his own life to the ground just to get away from her." I leaned forward, placing my hands on the table. "Jonas," I said, keeping my voice steady, "my grandfather was Arthur Brooks. Do you remember him?" Jonas blinked. His expression softened instantly. "Mr. Arthur? Yes, he was a good man. He used to bring donuts to the office when he came to sign papers. He always asked about my kids. He wanted me to have that house. Jonas," I said, "he wanted me to be safe. Right now, I am not safe. My grandmother, Evelyn, is not safe. We are fighting a war against people who have no lines they won't cross." I saw the conflict in his eyes. He was scared. Yes, but he was also carrying the heavy, suffocating weight of a secret he had never wanted to keep. "Arthur used to call me Sonny," Jonas whispered, a sad smile touching his lips. "He told me once that a man is only as good as his word." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He slid it across the sticky table. "I made these copies the night before the fire." He said, "Harold was acting strange. He was packing things into boxes, muttering to himself. I had a bad feeling. So when he went to the bathroom, I scanned the last few pages of his legal pad, the notes from his meeting with your parents. I opened the envelope. My hands shook as I pulled out the pages. They were scans of handwritten notes, scrawled in black ink. I read the highlighted section. October 12th, clients M, B, and V, B, insistent on immediate title transfer, explained legal impossibility due to existing will favoring E, B, granddaughter. V, B, stated, "We cannot wait for the old woman to die. We need the asset now." I refused. M, B, threatened exposure of my debts. V, B, smiled and said, "If the law cannot remove her, we will find another way. Accidents happen to documents all the time." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty bar. Accidents happen to documents all the time. "She planned the fire," I whispered, "or at least, she planned the destruction of the will." Jonas nodded. "Harold called me the night of the fire. He was drunk, crying. He said, 'It is done, Jonas. It is all gone. I am free.' He died of a heart attack 6 months later, but I think the guilt killed him long before that." I looked up at Jonas. "You have to testify." I said, "This note. It proves premeditation. It proves conspiracy." "I can't," he said, shaking his head. "They will ruin me. I work at a bank now. If they find out I kept client files—" Rachel chose that moment to step out from the shadows where she had been waiting near the jukebox. She walked over, her heels clicking on the linoleum, and placed a business card on the table. "Mr. Hale," she said, her voice calm but authoritative. "I am Rachel Hines. I specialize in fraud litigation, and I can tell you right now that under the Whistleblower Protection Act, and given the criminal nature of the conspiracy you just described, we can offer you significant protection." Jonas looked at her, then at the card. "But more importantly," Rachel continued, leaning down, "if you walk away now, and we lose this case, Vanessa Brooks gets away with stealing a house and potentially orchestrating an arson. Is that what Mr. Arthur would have wanted? Jonas looked at me. He looked at the notes on the table. He took a deep breath, the kind that rattles in your chest. No, he said, that is not what he would have wanted. He picked up Rachel's pen. Where do I sign? Having Jonas was a victory, but Rachel warned me it was not a silver bullet. Notes are good, she said, but juries love faces. We need to humanize this. We need to show them who is being hurt. That meant Evelyn. My grandmother was 82 years old. Her heart was weak, and her doctor had advised against stress. But when I told her about the notes, about what Vanessa had said regarding the old woman dying, Evelyn's face hardened into stone. I am not a piece of furniture waiting to be moved out, she said. Get the camera. Elena. We set up a tripod in her small living room. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Evelyn sat in her favorite armchair, wearing her Sunday pearls. I pressed record. My name is Evelyn Brooks, she said to the lens, her voice clear and strong. My husband, Arthur, built the house on Oak Creek Lane with his own hands. He laid the bricks, he planted the oak tree, and before he died, he looked me in the eye and said, Evie, that house is for Elena. Mark has Vanessa now, but Elena has no one but us. She paused, her eyes filling with tears, but she did not look away. They think because I am old, I am stupid. They think because I am quiet. I do not see. But I saw my son sell his soul for a woman who treats family like a business transaction, and I will not go to my grave letting a thief sleep in the bedroom my husband built. When she finished, I turned off the camera. We sat in silence for a long time. I realized then that this was not just about a house for her either. It was about legacy. It was about refusing to let a lie be the last word of her life story. While Evelyn provided the emotional anchor, Maya was busy digging into the digital graveyard. My best friend had a terrifying talent for finding things people thought they had deleted. She spent 3 nights combing through old family group chats, email threads from holidays, and Facebook comments. She found it on a Tuesday afternoon. Gotcha, she yelled from her laptop. I ran over. What is it? Maya pointed to a screenshot of an email chain from 4 years ago. It was between Vanessa and a contractor regarding a kitchen remodel. Look at the date, Maya said. This was 2 months after the fire. They were picking out granite countertops. I read the email. The contractor had asked about the budget. Vanessa's reply was casual, almost bored. Do not worry about the cost. We secured the title last month. It is fully ours now. We just have to pretend it is still Grandma's house while she is still kicking. Or she creates drama. But legally, we are clear to gut the place. While she is still kicking. It was grotesque. It showed her intent. It showed her malice. It showed that every smile she had given Evelyn for the last 4 years was a lie. But the biggest surprise came from the place I least expected, next door. Linda Kerr, the neighbor who had called the police the night of the trash bag incident, found me at the grocery store. I was trying to be invisible in the cereal aisle when she pulled her cart up next to mine. She was a small woman with blue-rinsed hair and eyes that missed nothing. I heard what they are saying about you, she whispered, pretending to look at a box of cornflakes. That you are crazy. That you attacked her. I gripped the handle of my cart. I know. Mrs. Kerr. Well, I know what I heard, she said, her voice dropping lower. I looked at her. What did you hear? I was on my porch that night, she said, smoking. Don't tell my doctor. The garage door was open just a crack at the bottom before she hit the opener. I heard the slap. Sounded like a pistol shot. And then I heard her scream. She heard Vanessa scream, I asked. No. Mrs. Kerr said, shaking her head. I heard her yell at you. She said, I won't let you take this house back. I froze. She didn't say get out, Mrs. Kerr continued. She didn't say stop hitting me. She said she wouldn't let you take the house back. Why would she say that if it was just a fight about trash? I looked at this woman, this neighbor I had ignored for years, realizing she held the missing piece of the psychological puzzle. Vanessa knew I was there because I had lost my job. She was paranoid that I had come back to claim my inheritance. The slap wasn't about a dirty garage floor. It was a preemptive strike. She was trying to beat the submission back into me. "Mrs. Kerr," I said, my voice trembling, "would you tell that to a judge?" Mrs. Kerr straightened up, adjusting her cardigan. "Vanessa Brooks called the Homeowners Association on me last year because my hydrangeas were 2 inches too high," she said flatly. "I would be delighted to tell a judge." I took all of this to Rachel: the notes, the video, the email, the neighbor's testimony. Rachel laid them out on her desk like tarot cards. "We have them," she said. "This establishes a pattern of behavior. It proves intent. It proves they knew the house wasn't theirs." But as the case grew stronger, the danger grew closer. It happened on a Thursday night. I had driven back to Maya's apartment after a late meeting with Rachel. I parked my car on the street, under a streetlight. When I came out the next morning, my car was leaning at a sickening angle. All 4 tires had been slashed. But it wasn't just the tires. Scratched into the paint of the driver's side door, jagged and raw, was a single word: leave. I stood there, staring at the vandalism, feeling the blood drain from my face. This wasn't legal maneuvering anymore. This wasn't gossip. This was violence. I called Rachel. Her voice was grim. "They are scared. Elena," she said, "rats bite hardest when they are cornered. But we cannot take chances. You cannot stay at Maya's. It is too exposed." "Where do I go?" I asked, looking at my ruined car. Rachel paused. "There is only one place they won't dare attack. Not yet. Grandma's." I packed my bags again. Maya drove me to Evelyn's apartment complex. It was a gated community for seniors, with security cameras and a guard at the front. It was a fortress of bingo nights and early dinners. When I walked in, Evelyn was waiting. She saw my face, pale and shaken. She saw the fear I was trying to hide. "They slashed my tires. Grandma," I whispered, dropping my bag. "They wrote 'leave' on my car." I expected her to be afraid. I expected her to tell me to stop, to drop the lawsuit, to save myself. Instead, Evelyn Brooks stood up. She walked over to the window and looked out at the parking lot, her reflection caught in the glass. She turned back to me, and for the first time, I saw the woman who had raised a son and buried a husband. I saw the matriarch. "Good," she said. I blinked. "Good?" "It means they know they are losing," she said fiercely. "Mark is a coward. But Vanessa is a bully, and bullies only escalate when their victims stop flinching." She walked over to her desk and picked up the phone. "Call Rachel," she commanded. "Tell her we are moving up the timeline." "What do you mean?" I asked. Evelyn looked at me, her blue eyes blazing with a fire that defied her 82 years. "They think this is just a legal dispute," she said. "They think they can scare us with knives and paint. But they forgot one thing." "What?" "They forgot whose name is on the foundation of that family," she said. She tapped the table with her finger, a rhythmic, heavy sound. "They want to ask who owns the house? Fine, we will go to court, and I will ask them to their faces, and I will make sure the whole town hears the answer." I looked at her, this small, fierce woman, and I felt the fear in my chest begin to transmute into something else, something hotter, something stronger. I was not just fighting for a piece of real estate anymore. I was fighting for her. I was fighting for the grandfather who wrote a letter to protect me. I was fighting for the version of myself that had been slapped down in a garage. I picked up the phone and dialed Rachel. "We are ready," I said. And outside, the wind howled through the trees, sounding like a storm that was finally, after 9 long years, about to break. The invitation came via email, bearing the subject line, "Family Healing Dinner." It was a grotesque title for what was essentially a summons to an ambush. My father and Vanessa wanted to meet. They wanted to clear the air. They wanted us to come to the house, my house, and sit at the table where I used to do my homework, to discuss terms of surrender. Rachel had been skeptical, But she saw the strategic value. "Go," she had said, leaning back in her leather chair, tapping a pen against her lips. "But do not sign anything. Let them talk. Let them make their offer. If they are desperate enough to invite you back after slashing your tires, they are desperate enough to incriminate themselves. Just make sure you get it on tape." So, on a rainy Thursday evening, I found myself standing on the front porch of 4209 Oak Creek Lane. The rain was coming down in sheets, blurring the world into gray streaks, but the house glowed with a warm, inviting light that felt entirely fraudulent. Maya was parked 3 houses down in her Honda Civic, the engine running, her phone in her hand. "If you are not out in 60 minutes, she had texted me, or if you text the code word, I am calling 911 and driving through the garage door." I adjusted the small digital recorder tucked inside the inner pocket of my blazer. I checked that the red light was covered with a piece of black tape. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of wet earth and pine, the smell of my childhood, and pressed the doorbell. It was Mark who opened the door. My father looked older than he had just a week ago. His face was gray, his eyes rimmed with red, as if he hadn't slept since the day the tires were slashed. He wore a cashmere sweater that looked expensive, but hung loosely on his frame. "Elena," he said, his voice tight. "Mom." He nodded at Grandma Evelyn, who stood beside me, leaning heavily on her cane but standing as straight as a soldier. "Hello, Mark," Evelyn said. Her voice was devoid of warmth. It was the tone one uses with a stranger who has cut in line at the post office. "Come in," he said, stepping back. "Vanessa is just finishing up in the kitchen." Walking into the house was a physical blow. It smelled of roast chicken and rosemary, a domestic perfume designed to trigger memories of comfort and safety. But underneath it, the house felt sterile. The gray walls seemed to close in. The furniture was perfectly arranged, like a showroom, devoid of life. We walked into the dining room. The table was set with the good china, the Wedgwood pattern my mother had bought for their 10th anniversary. Seeing Vanessa's placemats under my mother's plates made my stomach turn. Vanessa emerged from the kitchen carrying a steaming platter. She was wearing a silk dress in a soft peach color, her hair blown out to perfection. She looked like the cover of a lifestyle magazine. She looked like a woman who had absolutely nothing to hide. "Elena! Evelyn!" she exclaimed, flashing a bright, brittle smile. "I am so glad you came. I know things have been strained, but family is family, right? We fight, we forgive. That is what we do." She gestured for us to sit. "Please, sit down. I made the roast chicken you used to like." "Elena, Mark said it was your favorite." "It was not my favorite. My favorite was lasagna. The roast chicken was what she liked to make because she claimed it was elegant." I said nothing. I sat down. Evelyn sat next to me, placing her handbag on the floor by her feet. She did not take off her coat. We ate in a silence that was punctuated only by the scrape of silverware against porcelain. Vanessa chattered nervously, filling the void with meaningless noise about the weather, the price of organic vegetables, and a new boutique that had opened downtown. Mark stared at his plate, pushing peas around with his fork. Finally, after the plates were cleared and coffee was poured, the performance shifted gears. Vanessa took a sip of her wine, leaving a perfect lipstick stain on the rim. She set the glass down and folded her hands on the table. "Well," she began, her voice dropping to a sympathetic register that made my skin crawl. "We wanted to have you over because Mark and I have been so worried about you." "Elena." "Worried?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Yes, worried." She sighed. "Losing your job. That is a terrible blow. And then this obsession with the house. We understand that you are grieving the life you thought you would have. It is hard when things do not go to plan. Not everyone is lucky enough to have a solid foundation, a real home to come back to when they fail." The insult was wrapped in so much cotton it almost felt soft. When they fail. "We want to help," Mark chimed in. He reached under the table and pulled out a manila folder. He placed it in the center of the table, pushing it slightly toward me. What is this? I asked. It is a family agreement, Mark said, his voice trembling slightly. Vanessa and we talked. We do not want to drag this through the courts. It is ugly, it is expensive, and frankly, Elena, you cannot afford a legal battle right now. He opened the folder. Inside was a stapled document, thick with legal jargon. We are willing to offer you a settlement, Vanessa said, her eyes gleaming, a gesture of goodwill. I looked at the paper. Settlement amount, $5,000. $5,000 for a house worth $400,000, for my birthright, for my mother's memory. We will give you $5,000 to help you get back on your feet, Vanessa continued, speaking as if she were offering me a kidney. In exchange, you sign this quitclaim deed confirming that you have no interest in the property and that you withdraw all allegations of fraud. You take the money, you go back to the city, and you start over. I stared at the number. It was insulting. It was laughable. But more than that, it was terrified. They were trying to buy me off with pocket change because they knew that if this went to discovery, they would lose everything. I looked up at my father. $5,000, I repeated. It is a lot of money. Elena, Mark said quickly, you could get a new apartment. You could fix your car. Fix my car? I asked. The car someone slashed? Mark flinched. I do not know anything about that. That was just bad luck. I looked at Vanessa. She was watching me like a hawk, waiting for me to take the bait. You want me to sign away Grandpa Arthur's house for $5,000, I said slowly. It is not Arthur's house, Vanessa snapped, her mask slipping for a fraction of a second. It is our house. Mark and I have paid the taxes. We have done the renovations. We have lived here. You are just a guest. Elena, a guest who has overstayed her welcome. We are trying to be generous. I felt the recorder burning against my chest. I had what I needed. They were admitting to the dispute. They were trying to coerce a settlement. But I was not done. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. Dad, I said, ignoring Vanessa, do you remember the tree swing in the backyard? The one Grandpa built? Mark looked up, surprised. Yes. Do you remember what he told you when he built it? I asked. He said he used galvanized steel chains because he wanted it to last for his grandchildren. He didn't build it for you. He built it for the future. I paused, letting the silence stretch. Do you think Grandpa Arthur would be sitting here, eating this chicken, if he knew you were trying to buy his granddaughter's inheritance for the price of a used sedan? Do you think he would be proud of you, Dad? Or do you think he would be ashamed that his son turned into a thief? Mark's face went white. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Vanessa slammed her hand on the table. The wine glasses jumped. Stop it, she hissed. Do not you dare talk to him like that. You are a manipulative little brat. You have always been jealous. You want to ruin us because you cannot stand that we are happy. Happy? I asked. Dad looks like he's about to have a stroke. You look like you're about to scream. Is this happiness, or is this guilt? Sign the paper. Elena, Vanessa shouted. Sign it and get out. Or so help me God. I will ruin you. I will make sure you never work in this state again. I will sue you for defamation until you are living in a cardboard box. The air in the room was electric. The mask was gone. This was the real Vanessa. And then, movement caught my eye. Evelyn stood up. She did not stand up quickly. She stood up slowly, painfully, pushing herself up with her cane. She had been so quiet that I think they had forgotten she was there. She was just an old woman in a coat, a prop. Evelyn reached into her handbag. She did not pull out a tissue. She pulled out a large, thick envelope. It was the same envelope we had taken from the bank vault. She placed it on the table, right on top of Mark's insulting $5,000 offer. The sound it made was heavy. Thud. What is that? Vanessa asked, her eyes narrowing. Evelyn did not answer her. She looked at Mark. Open it. Mark, she said. Mark looked at the envelope. He looked at his mother. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely lift his water glass. I said open it, Evelyn commanded. Mark reached out and opened the clasp. He pulled out the document. He saw the blue legal backing. He saw the notary stamp. He saw the signature. He let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. "It is real," he whispered. Vanessa snatched the paper from his hand. Her eyes scanned it frantically. Her face went pale, then red, then pale again. This is fake," she stammered. "This is old," Harold said. Harold said it was gone. She looked up at us, her eyes wide with panic. "It was burned," she yelled. "It was all burned. This is a forgery. You made this up." Evelyn leaned forward. She placed both hands on the table, leaning her weight on her knuckles. She looked terrifying. She looked magnificent. "It was never burned." "Vanessa," Evelyn said, her voice low and dangerous. "Arthur knew you. He knew you before you even knew yourself. He knew you would try to take what did not belong to you. So he hid it." She pointed a crooked finger at the document. "That is the original will. It leaves everything to Elena, every brick, every beam, every blade of grass." Vanessa threw the paper down. "It does not matter. We have the deed. The county says it is ours. We have lived here for 5 years. Possession is 9/10 of the law." "You have possession because you lied," I said calmly. "You have possession because you blackmailed a lawyer and committed fraud." "You cannot prove that," Vanessa screamed. "It is your word against ours. And who are you? You are nobody." Evelyn hit the table with her cane. Crack. The sound silenced the room instantly. Evelyn looked at Mark. She looked at him with a disappointment so profound, it felt like it could crush bones. "Mark," she said, "look at me." Mark looked up. He was crying, silent tears running down his gray cheeks. "Your father built this house when he came back from the war," Evelyn said softly. "He worked double shifts at the factory to pay for the lumber. He planted the garden for me. He built the nursery for you. He died in the master bedroom, holding my hand." She took a breath, her chest heaving. "He left this house to Elena because he wanted to protect her, from the world, and, God help us, from you." She turned her gaze to Vanessa. "You talk about ownership, Vanessa. You talk about rights. You talk about money." Evelyn paused. She looked around the room, at the gray walls, at the expensive curtains, at the sham of a life they had built on a foundation of lies. "So tell me," Evelyn said, her voice rising, filling the room, echoing off the high ceilings. "If Arthur wrote this will, and if Arthur built this house, and if Arthur gave it to his granddaughter—" She leaned in, her face inches from Vanessa's. "Then tell me, whose house is this?" The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Mark put his head in his hands. Vanessa stood there, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. She looked at the will. She looked at me. She looked at the walls she had painted. "It is mine!" she shrieked. But her voice lacked conviction. It sounded thin, hysterical. "It is my house. I picked out the curtains. I chose the paint. I live here. You are just greedy. You are a greedy little girl trying to steal from your father. You—" "No!" Evelyn shouted. The single word cut Vanessa off like a slap. "No one is stealing anything," Evelyn said, her voice icy, "because you cannot steal what was never yours. You have been a squatter in this house for 5 years. Vanessa, you are a guest who refused to leave, and guests do not get to claim the furniture just because they sat on it." Evelyn reached out and took the will back. She slid it into the envelope. She put the envelope back in her bag. She looked at me. "Come on, Elena, we are done here." I stood up. My legs felt steady. My heart was pounding, but it was a strong, rhythmic beat. I looked at Mark. He was sobbing quietly now, his shoulders shaking. "Goodbye, Dad," I said. I looked at Vanessa. She was gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles white, breathing hard, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape route. I touched the recorder in my pocket to make sure it was still running. "I will see you in court, Vanessa," I said. I turned and walked toward the door. "You cannot do this," Vanessa screamed after us. "You cannot just walk out. We have a deal. $5,000. Take the money." I did not turn back. "Whose house is this?" she screamed, mocking Evelyn, her voice cracking into madness. "It is mine! It is mine!" I opened the front door. The cool, wet air hit my face. It felt like baptism. It felt like freedom. I walked out onto the porch, Evelyn beside me. I opened the umbrella and held it over her head. We walked down the driveway, past the manicured lawn, past the mailbox, toward Maya's car. Behind us, the front door slammed shut, but the silence that followed was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a tomb. I got into the car. Maya looked at me, her eyes wide. "Did you get it?" she asked. I pulled the recorder out of my pocket and pressed the stop button. "I got everything," I said. I looked back at the house one last time through the rain-streaked window. It looked smaller now. It looked sad. It looked like a place that was waiting for its real owner to come home. "Whose house is this?" I whispered to the glass. "It is mine." The fallout from the dinner was immediate. If the confrontation at the dining table was a private skirmish, what followed was a public declaration of war. It started less than 2 hours after I left the house. My phone buzzed on the nightstand in Grandma Evelyn's guest room. It was a notification from Facebook. Vanessa Brooks posted a status update. I knew I should not have looked. Rachel had told me a dozen times that social media was a sewer and I should stay on the sidewalk, but curiosity is a masochistic reflex. I opened the app. The post was a photo of an old, empty rocking chair on their front porch. A staged shot, filtered to look melancholic and vintage. The caption was a masterclass in passive-aggressive storytelling. It is heartbreaking when you open your home and your heart to family, only to be treated with coldness and greed. Mark and I are devastated tonight. We tried to offer an olive branch, but some children forget who raised them. They forget that love is about gratitude, not about what you can take. Please pray for our family as we navigate this betrayal. It was vague enough to avoid a defamation lawsuit, but specific enough that everyone in Riverton knew exactly who she was talking about. The comments were already rolling in. "So sorry you are going through this. Vanessa, you have done so much for that girl. Ungrateful kids these days. Stay strong." "Is this about Elena? I heard she was back in town. Trouble follows her." I felt my face burn. She was spinning the narrative in real time, painting herself as the martyr and me as the prodigal villain. She did not mention the forged will. She did not mention the blackmail. She just mentioned love and betrayal, the two currencies that small towns traded in most frequently. By the next morning, the whisper campaign had escalated into a shout. A screenshot appeared in the Riverton Community Connect group, a forum usually reserved for complaints about potholes and lost cats. This time, it was an anonymous post. "Watch out for a certain young woman back in town who is taking advantage of her elderly grandmother to try and kick her own father out of his house. It is sick what people will do for money when they lose their big city jobs. Elder abuse comes in many forms. Folks." I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the screen, feeling like I was back in high school, being bullied by the popular clique. Only this time, the bully was my stepmother, and the audience was the entire town. My phone rang. It was Rachel. "Do not reply," she said before I could even say hello. "I am reading them. Rachel, they are calling me an abuser. They are saying I am manipulating Evelyn." "Screen capture everything," Rachel commanded. Her voice was calm, sharp, and professional. Every comment, every like, every share. Do not type a single word in defense. Do not engage with the trolls. "But they are lying," I cried, the frustration boiling over. "Let them lie," Rachel said. "In fact, I hope they lie more, because while Vanessa is busy winning the sympathy vote on Facebook, we are about to win the evidence war in the courtroom. Let her play to the audience. Elena, we are playing to the judge." She was right. While Vanessa was busy crafting her victimhood online, we were assembling a fortress of paper. That afternoon, Rachel filed our formal motion to the court. We submitted everything. We submitted the original will found in the safety deposit box. We submitted the USB drive containing the audio recording of my father threatening Harold Pierce. We submitted the scanned notes from Jonas Hale detailing the conspiracy. We submitted the video testimony of Evelyn Brooks. It was a massive, overwhelming dump of evidence. It was the legal equivalent of dropping a piano on their heads. And then came the twist that not even Rachel had predicted. 2 days after our filing, we received a notification from the court. The judge had ordered Riverstone Community Bank to provide a complete audit of the safety deposit box history as part of the discovery process. We expected a standard log. What we got was a smoking gun wrapped in bureaucratic letterhead. The bank's legal compliance department sent over a sworn affidavit. It stated that safety deposit box 304, registered to Arthur Brooks, had been accessed by Evelyn Brooks on the date we retrieved the will, but it also included a maintenance log. The log confirmed that the box had been continuously rented and paid for via an automatic deduction from Arthur's trust account for the last 10 years. This detail seemed small, but Rachel explained its explosive significance. "Do you see this?" she asked, pointing to the line on the document. Mark and Vanessa claimed in their initial probate filing 5 years ago that Arthur died intestate, without a will, and that all his personal papers were destroyed in the fire at the lawyer's office. I nodded. Right. But this bank account proves that the trust was still active, Rachel said, her eyes gleaming. And as the executor, Mark had access to the bank statements. He saw the monthly fee for the safety deposit box. He knew the box existed. She tapped the paper. He knew there was a box, Elena, which means he knew there was a possibility of documents existing outside the lawyer's office. When he told the court that everything was destroyed, he committed perjury. He lied under oath. This document from the bank proves he made no effort to check the one place where a will would logically be kept. It proves willful negligence at best and deliberate concealment at worst. It was the final nail in the coffin of their "we didn't know" defense. However, as the legal walls began to close in on them, their tactics on the ground became uglier. Mrs. Linda Kerr, the neighbor who had agreed to testify about hearing Vanessa scream, "I won't let you take this house back," called me on a Tuesday evening. She was crying. "Elena," she sobbed, "you need to come over or call the police. I do not know what to do." I drove over immediately, ignoring the fear that tightened my chest. When I pulled up to Mrs. Kerr's house, I saw it. Her car, a pristine beige sedan that she washed every Sunday, was sitting in her driveway. The windshield was shattered. A large landscaping brick lay on the dashboard, surrounded by a spiderweb of broken glass. I stood there, looking at the destruction, and I felt a cold rage settle in my stomach. "It happened an hour ago," Mrs. Kerr said, clutching her sweater tight around her. "I heard a crash. By the time I got to the window, they were gone, but I saw a truck speeding away, a dark truck." My father drove a dark truck. It was clumsy. It was brutal. It was the act of people who had stopped thinking and started panicking. They were lashing out, trying to silence witnesses, trying to scare us into submission. I held Mrs. Kerr's hand. "I am so sorry. Linda, I am so sorry I dragged you into this." She looked at her car, then at me. Her eyes were red, but her jaw was set. "You did not drag me into anything, honey," she said. "They did. And if they think a brick is going to stop me from telling the truth, they have forgotten that I survived 2 husbands and a hip replacement. I am testifying, Elena, and now I am going to enjoy it." We called the police. We added the report to our growing pile of evidence. Rachel decided it was time to go for the throat. "We are adding a count to the lawsuit," she told me the next morning. "What count?" I asked. "Elder financial abuse," Rachel said. She pulled out a stack of bank documents that Maya had unearthed during her deep dive into public records. When Mark refinanced the house last year to pay for the kitchen renovation and a new boat, he needed a co-signer because his credit score was tanking. He used Evelyn. "What?" I asked, shocked. "Grandma never told me that." "She didn't know," Rachel said grimly. "The signature is shaky. It looks like hers, but barely. I suspect he put the papers in front of her, told her it was for insurance or medical updates, and she signed it. He leveraged her good credit to secure a loan on a house she didn't even know she still legally owned. He put her financial future at risk to buy quartz countertops. In the state of Colorado, financial abuse of a person over 70 carries heavy penalties. It could mean mandatory restitution. It could mean jail time. We filed the amendment. The stakes had just shifted from losing a house to going to prison. That evening, my phone rang again. It was my father. I stared at the screen. The name Dad flashed white against the black background. My thumb hovered over the decline button. I knew I should not answer. Rachel would kill me. But I answered. "Hello," I said. "Elena." His voice was unrecognizable. It was not the voice of the distant father. It was not the voice of the man who had tried to bribe me with $5,000. It was the voice of a man who was drowning. "Elena, please," he whispered. "You have to stop this." I stood in the hallway of Evelyn's apartment, clutching the phone. "I cannot stop it, Dad. You started this." "They called me at work today," he said. His voice cracked. "The credit bureau, the background check agency, they are investigating me for fraud. Elena, because of the lawsuit. My boss. He called me into his office. If I lose my security clearance, I lose my job. I am 55 years old. I cannot lose my job." I felt a pang of guilt so sharp it almost doubled me over. This was my father, the man who taught me to ride a bike, the man who used to make me pancakes on Saturdays before Vanessa came along. I was systematically destroying his life. I did not want you to lose your job," I stammered. "Then drop it," he begged. "Please, Elena, we will give you the house, okay? We will move out. Just drop the elder abuse charge. Drop the fraud allegations. Let us settle this quietly. If this goes to trial, if I have a record, I am ruined." He was crying now, ugly, wet sobs that rasped against the speaker. "Vanessa, she is falling apart." He continued. "She is taking pills to sleep. We are terrified. Elena, is that what you wanted? To destroy us?" I closed my eyes. I remembered the slap. I remembered the whore comments on Facebook. I remembered the brick through Mrs. Kerr's windshield. But hearing him beg broke something in me. I felt like a monster. I need to think about it," I whispered. I hung up. I sank to the floor, leaning my head against the wall, burying my face in my knees. I am destroying them. I thought, I am ruining his life. I felt a hand on my shoulder. I looked up. Evelyn was standing there. She had heard the call. She must have. "Get up," she said softly. I shook my head. "I can't. Grandma, he is my dad. He is going to lose his job. He is going to lose everything. Maybe I should just take the house and let the rest go. Maybe I'm taking this too far." Evelyn sat down on the floor next to me. It was a struggle for her, but she did it. She put her arm around me. "Elena, look at me." I looked at her. Her face was lined with age, but her eyes were clear. "You are not destroying him," she said firmly. "He destroyed himself. He destroyed himself the moment he chose to listen to a woman who told him to rob his own child. He destroyed himself when he signed those papers. He destroyed himself when he watched you get hit and did nothing." She squeezed my shoulder. "Consequences are not cruelty, Elena. They are just the truth catching up to you." "But he is your son," I whispered. "Does it not hurt you?" Evelyn looked away, staring at the wall. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. "It breaks my heart," she admitted. "I love him. I will always love him. But loving someone does not mean letting them get away with sin. If you stop now, if you let them hide the fraud just to save his job, then the lie wins. And a family built on a lie is not a family. It is a conspiracy." She turned back to me. "You are not breaking this family, my dear. You are putting the bones back in place. It hurts to set a broken bone. You have to pull it and twist it to make it straight. But if you do not, it never heals. It just stays crippled forever." She wiped the tear from my face with her thumb. Do not let them limp away from this. Make them walk straight or make them crawl. But do not let them pretend. Her words settled over me like a blanket. She was right. Mercy without justice was just enabling. If I stopped now, Vanessa would spin it as a victory. She would tell the town she gave me the house out of pity. My father would never learn. The cycle would continue. I stood up. I helped Evelyn up. I am not calling him back, I said. Good, Evelyn said. The morning of the trial arrived with a sky the color of bruised iron. I stood in front of the mirror in the guest room. I had spent an hour deciding what to wear. I pushed aside the soft cardigans and the floral dresses, the clothes of the nice girl, the dutiful daughter. I chose a charcoal gray suit. It was sharp, tailored, and severe. I wore a white blouse buttoned to the top. I pulled my hair back into a tight, low bun. I put on simple stud earrings. I looked at myself in the glass. I did not look like a victim. I did not look like a girl who had been slapped in a garage. I did not look like someone begging for scraps. I looked like the owner of the house at 4209 Oak Creek Lane. I looked like a woman who was done apologizing for taking up space. I picked up my briefcase. Inside was the will. Inside was the truth. I walked out to the living room where Evelyn was waiting. She was wearing her best black dress and a hat with a small veil. She looked like she was going to a funeral. In a way, I suppose she was. We were going to bury the version of our family that Mark and Vanessa had created. Ready? I asked. Evelyn nodded, gripping her cane. Whose house is this? She asked, a faint smile touching her lips. It is ours, I said. We walked out the door, leaving the silence behind us, heading toward the storm that was waiting in the courthouse. The courtroom doors swung open, and the air inside felt heavy, pressurized, like the cabin of an airplane right before it hits turbulence. I walked to the plaintiff's table with Rachel, keeping my eyes fixed forward. To my right, the defense team was already assembled. They had hired a new lawyer, a man named Sterling who wore a suit that cost more than my severance package and possessed a smile that did not reach his eyes. Mark and Vanessa sat behind him. They looked like the victims of a terrible misunderstanding. Vanessa was dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, though I saw no tears. Mark was staring at the table, his face the color of old ash. They were playing their parts perfectly, the beleaguered parents being dragged through the mud by an ungrateful child. Sterling wasted no time in his opening argument. He paced in front of the jury box, his voice smooth and reasonable. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, gesturing toward me, we are here today because of a tragedy, not a legal tragedy, but a familial one. You see a young woman who, after failing to launch in her career, returned home to the loving arms of her father and stepmother. And how did she repay that kindness? With violence, with demands, with a fabricated story about a lost will designed to extort the very people who put a roof over her head. He called his witnesses. They were neighbors, people I had known for years, people who had eaten at our barbecue. Mrs. Gable took the stand and swore that Vanessa was a saint who had single-handedly renovated the house and cared for Mark. She looked at me with genuine pity, saying, Elena has always been spirited, but lately she seemed unstable, desperate. It was a character assassination, systematic and brutal. I sat there, gripping the edge of the table, feeling the weight of the town's judgment pressing down on my neck. They were painting a picture of me as a chaotic, greedy failure. For a moment, I almost believed them. Then it was my turn. I took the stand. The wood of the witness chair felt hard against my back. I swore to tell the truth. Rachel approached me gently. She did not ask about the deed transfers or the bank logs yet. She asked about the night of the trash bag. Tell the court what happened that night. Elena, she said. I took a breath. I looked at Vanessa. She was staring at me, her eyes daring me to speak. It was not about the trash, I said, my voice steady. It was never about the trash. I spilled some water on the garage floor. It was an accident. But Vanessa, she did not see a spill. She saw an opportunity. I described the slap. I described the way my head snapped back, the stinging pain, the shock of hitting the concrete. She stood over me. I told the jury, and she did not look angry. She looked triumphant. She told me I was a parasite. She told me I had no rights in that house. That was the message. It was physical, yes, but it was psychological. She wanted me to know that as long as she was there, I was nothing. Sterling cross-examined me, trying to twist my words, asking if I had been drinking, asking if I had provoked her. I held my ground. I was not the scared girl in the garage anymore. Then came Linda Kerr. Mrs. Kerr walked to the stand with a limp, leaning on her cane, but her face was set in stone. She had taped a picture of her smashed windshield to her purse, a silent protest. Sterling tried to dismiss her as a nosy neighbor, but Linda was sharper than he expected. I was on my porch, she said clearly into the microphone. I heard the slap. It sounded like a gunshot. And then I heard Vanessa scream. What did she scream? Rachel asked. She screamed, "I will not let you take this house back." The courtroom went quiet. Rachel let the words hang there. Mrs. Kerr, Rachel asked, did she say get out of my house? Did she say clean up this mess? No, Linda said firmly. She said take this house back. Rachel turned to the jury. Why would a woman screaming about a spill in the garage talk about taking the house back? Unless, of course, she knew the house did not belong to her. Unless she knew the person on the floor was the rightful owner. That single sentence shifted the gravity of the room. It transformed a domestic dispute into a property war. Vanessa shifted in her seat. Mark loosened his tie. Rachel went back to her table. She picked up the heavy manila envelope, the one from the safety deposit box. Your Honor, she said, the defense claims that Arthur Brooks died intestate. They claim his will was destroyed in a tragic fire at the office of Harold Pierce. They claim Mark Brooks inherited the property by default. She opened the envelope. She pulled out the document with the blue backing. We submit into evidence Exhibit A, she said, the original last will and testament of Arthur Brooks, retrieved 3 weeks ago from Safety Deposit Box 304 at Riverstone Community Bank, a box that has been paid for, monthly, by the estate account managed by Mark Brooks. She walked the document to the judge. The judge put on his glasses. He read it. He looked at Mark. He looked at the document again. This will clearly states, Rachel continued, her voice rising, that upon her 25th birthday, the property at 4209 Oak Creek Lane transfers solely and completely to Elena Brooks. Sterling jumped up. Objection. Authentication. We have no way of knowing if that is a forgery. Rachel smiled. It was a cold, shark-like smile. I am glad you asked, she said. She called Jonas Hale. When Jonas walked in, Mark went pale. He recognized him. He recognized the man who had sat in the corner of the office 5 years ago, the quiet assistant he had ignored while he threatened a lawyer. Jonas sat down. He was nervous, sweating slightly, but he looked at me and nodded. Mr. Hale, Rachel asked, were you present on October 12th, 2018, at a meeting between your employer, Harold Pierce, and the defendants? I was, Jonas said. What happened at that meeting? Jonas took a breath. They wanted Harold to change the will. They knew the house went to Elena. Vanessa said they could not wait for the grandmother to die. She said they needed the equity now. A murmur rippled through the gallery. And what did Mr. Pierce say? He refused, Jonas said. He told them it was illegal. He told them the original was sealed. And then? Then Mark Brooks told him that he knew about his gambling debts. Jonas said, his voice shook, but he kept going. He told Harold that if he did not make the problem go away, he would report him to the Bar Association and ruin him. Sterling was on his feet again. Hearsay. This is the word of a disgruntled former employee. Rachel held up a hand. Mr. Hale, did you make any record of this meeting? Yes, Jonas said. Harold was paranoid. He told me to record the audio of difficult clients, for his protection. Rachel picked up the USB drive. Your Honor, we submit Exhibit B, The audio recording of the meeting on October 12th. Sterling shouted his objection, citing chain of custody, citing privacy, citing everything he could think of. The judge overruled him. Rachel plugged the drive into the court's AV system. The room fell into a silence so deep I could hear the hum of the air conditioner. Then, the voice filled the room. If you do not help us fix this will, maybe the Bar Association finds out about your finances. Maybe you lose everything. It was Mark. There was no mistaking the desperation, the malice in his tone. Then Harold's voice, shaking, terrified. I cannot do it. Mark, the girl gets the house. Then Vanessa. Cold, sharp, Arthur is dead. Harold, and nobody cares what a dead man wanted. Make the problem go away. The recording ended. The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy. It was the sound of a lie dying in public. Vanessa was gripping the table so hard her knuckles were white. She was not looking at the jury. She was staring at the table, her face a mask of frozen horror. Mark had his head in his hands. Sterling tried to rally. He claimed the audio was doctored. He claimed it was AI generated. He was flailing. Rachel walked back to her table and picked up a stack of papers. We anticipated this objection, she said. We have the metadata analysis from a forensic audio expert confirming the creation date of the file. We have a sworn affidavit from the Riverstone Community Bank confirming the withdrawal of $10,000 from Mark Brooks's account 2 days after this meeting, a withdrawal that matches a deposit into Harold Pierce's personal account. And we have a sealed complaint Harold Pierce filed with the State Bar Ethics Hotline the day before the fire, reporting that he was being coerced by a client named Brooks. She dropped the papers on the defense table. Thud. It was over. The legal case was watertight. The fraud was exposed. The blackmail was proven. But we were not done. There was one more voice that needed to be heard. The prosecution calls Evelyn Brooks, Rachel announced. A bailiff helped Evelyn to the stand. She walked slowly, her cane tapping a rhythm on the floorboards. She sat down and adjusted her shawl. She looked small in the big leather chair, but when she raised her eyes, she looked like a giant. Mrs. Brooks, Rachel asked softly, why are you here today? Evelyn looked at Mark. She looked at him with a sadness that broke my heart. I am here because I failed, she said. The room was confused. I failed to teach my son that integrity is worth more than real estate, she continued. My husband, Arthur, built that house with sweat and love. He wanted it to be a sanctuary. He specifically left it to Elena because he saw the greed growing in this family like a weed. She turned to the jury. Arthur told me once, Evie, if a day comes when that girl has to stand in front of a judge to beg for her own home, then we have failed. If she has to fight her own father to get what is hers, then the house is already broken. She paused, her voice trembling with emotion. I am here to fix it. I am here to tell you that Mark Brooks and Vanessa Brooks have lived in a stolen house for 5 years. They lied to me. They lied to the bank. They lied to this court. And they hit my granddaughter because she reminded them of their sin. She pointed at Mark. That is not your house, Mark. It never was. You sold your honor for a kitchen renovation, and now you have neither. Mark looked up at her. Dad, please, he mouthed, but no sound came out. Evelyn looked away. The rejection was absolute. The judge cleared his throat. He looked at the pile of evidence on his bench. He looked at the weeping stepmother and the broken father. He looked at me, sitting straight and tall, my hand resting on my grandmother's arm. We are going to take a recess, the judge said. His voice was grave. I need to review the admissibility of the additional financial records and the new motion regarding elder abuse, but... He looked over his glasses at Sterling. If I were the defense, I would use this time to consider very carefully how you want to proceed. The evidence presented here regarding fraud and perjury is substantial. He banged his gavel. The room erupted into noise. Reporters were typing furiously on their phones. Neighbors were whispering, looking at Vanessa with open disgust. I did not move. I sat there, feeling the vibration of the gavel still echoing in my bones. Rachel leaned over to me. "They are done," she whispered. "They are going to try to settle. Do not let them—" I looked at Vanessa. She was arguing with Sterling, her face red, her hands waving frantically. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw pure, unfiltered fear. I looked at the will sitting on the judge's bench. My name was on it. Elena Brooks. It was not just a piece of paper anymore. It was a sword, and I had just swung it. The recess felt like it lasted a decade, but when the bailiff opened the doors and called us back in, the air in the room had changed. It was no longer the stale, recycled air of a county building. It felt charged, electric, like the moment before a lightning strike. Judge Miller swept into the room, her robes billowing. She did not look at the gallery. She did not look at the lawyers. She sat down, adjusted her glasses, and picked up the single sheet of paper that had been lying in the center of her desk. She looked directly at Mark and Vanessa. "I have reviewed the evidence," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it reached every corner of the room. "I have reviewed the audio recordings. I have reviewed the bank records, and I have reviewed the original last will and testament of Arthur Brooks." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "It is the finding of this court that the deed transfer executed on October 14th, 2018, was fraudulent. It was executed based on a false premise, with the deliberate intent to bypass the legal probate process and defraud the rightful heir." She looked at the defense table. "Furthermore, given the audio evidence of coercion and the sworn testimony regarding the intimidation of the late Harold Pierce, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for a criminal investigation into fraud, forgery, and potential arson." Vanessa let out a sound that was half gasp, half scream. Mark slumped in his chair as if his spine had been removed. "Therefore," Judge Miller continued, "relentless. The court rules in favor of the plaintiff. The property at 4209 Oak Creek Lane is declared the sole and legal property of Elena Brooks, effective immediately." She banged the gavel. Crack! "The defendants, Mark and Vanessa Brooks, are hereby ordered to vacate the premises within 72 hours. A court-appointed officer will oversee the transfer of keys." The room exploded. It was chaos. Reporters were shouting questions. Neighbors were gasping. But over it all, one voice rose like a siren. "No!" Vanessa stood up, knocking her chair over. Her face was twisted into a mask of ugly, raw fury. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "You are doing this!" she screamed. "You are killing this family. You are ruining us over a house. How can you sleep at night, you ungrateful little witch?" Usually, a courtroom outburst like that would make people uncomfortable. Usually, people would look away, but not today. Today, the neighbors who had sat in the gallery, the people who had read her Facebook posts about love and family, looked at her, and for the first time, they saw the woman who had slapped a girl in a garage. They saw the woman who had threatened a lawyer. They saw the greed that had been hiding behind her smile for 5 years. "Order!" Judge Miller shouted. "Bailiff, control the defendant." A bailiff stepped forward, placing a hand on Vanessa's arm. She shook him off, sobbing now, collapsing into Mark's arms. But Mark was not hugging her back. He was staring at the table, his eyes hollow, looking like a man who had just realized he was holding a handful of ash. I did not look at them. I looked at Evelyn. My grandmother was sitting with her hands folded in her lap. She was crying, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of relief. She nodded at me once, a small, sharp nod. "We did it." Walking out of the courthouse felt like stepping onto a different planet. The sun had come out, piercing through the gray clouds, washing the concrete steps in bright, harsh light. A small crowd had gathered at the bottom of the stairs. There were a few local reporters with microphones, and a dozen neighbors who hadn't been able to get into the courtroom. When they saw me, the whispering stopped. Rachel walked beside me, her hand on my elbow. "Keep walking," she murmured. "Do not stop. Do not engage." "Ms. Brooks," a reporter shouted, thrusting a phone in my direction. "Ms. Brooks, Do you have any comment on the judge's ruling? Are you planning to press charges for the assault? I stopped. Rachel tightened her grip, signaling me to keep moving, but I felt a need to say it. I needed to say it once, for the record, so that Vanessa's Facebook post would not be the only version of the story. I turned to the reporter. I just want to live in the house my grandfather left me, I said. My voice was steady. It carried over the noise of the street. Nothing more, nothing less. I turned back and walked to the car. I did not smile. I did not pump my fist. Victory did not feel like a party. It felt like finally putting down a heavy backpack that I had been carrying for 5 years. 3 days later, the eviction happened. It was a Tuesday morning. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. I pulled up to the curb of Oak Creek Lane in a rental car. Evelyn was in the passenger seat. There was already a police cruiser parked in the driveway. A sheriff's deputy stood on the porch, holding a clipboard. The street was quiet, but curtains were twitching. I saw Mrs. Gable peeking out from behind her blinds. I saw Mrs. Kerr standing openly on her lawn, holding her garden hose, watching with grim satisfaction. The neighborhood was watching the final act of the play. I helped Evelyn out of the car. She was moving slowly today, her arthritis flaring up, but she refused to wait in the vehicle. I want to see them leave, she had said at breakfast. I need to know they are gone. We walked up the driveway. The garage door, the one where I had been slapped, was open. Boxes were stacked haphazardly inside. A moving truck was parked on the street, half full. The front door opened. Vanessa walked out. She looked wrecked. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she was wearing sweatpants. Her face was puffy, her eyes red and swollen. She was carrying a lamp, one of the ugly modern ones she had bought to replace my mother's vintage reading light. She stopped when she saw us. For a second, I thought she was going to throw the lamp at me. The hate radiating off her was palpable. It came off her in waves, hot and suffocating. "Are you happy?" she spat. "You come here to gloat? To watch us thrown into the street?" I did not answer. I just stood there, my hands clasped in front of me. "This is my house," she screamed, her voice cracking. "I put 5 years of my life into this place. I chose the paint. I planted the garden. You have no right. No one has the right to kick me out of my own home." The sheriff's deputy stepped forward. He was a large man with a patient face. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "we have been over this. The court order is specific. You are not the owner. You have 10 minutes to vacate the premises before I have to escort you off the property for trespassing." Vanessa turned on him. "Trespassing? I am a victim here. That girl. She is the criminal. She stole this from me." She looked at Mark, who was walking out the door carrying a box of kitchen supplies. "Mark, tell them. Tell them this is our house." Mark stopped. He looked at Vanessa, screaming on the lawn. He looked at the police officer. He looked at the neighbors watching from the sidewalk. And then he looked at me. He looked at the bruise on my cheek that had finally faded. He looked at the suit I was wearing. He looked at the daughter he had failed to protect because he wanted a quiet life. He did not say a word. He just walked past Vanessa, head down, and carried the box to the truck. Vanessa stared at him, betrayed. She let out a shriek of frustration and slammed the lamp onto the grass. It didn't break, which somehow made it more pathetic. Evelyn stepped forward. She walked past the police officer. She walked past the broken lamp. She stood right at the bottom of the porch steps, looking up at Vanessa. It was the exact spot where she used to stand when I was a little girl, waiting for me to run out and hug her. It was the spot where she had stood that night, 3 weeks ago, when the police lights were flashing. "Vanessa," Evelyn said. Vanessa looked down, her chest heaving. "What? What do you want, old woman?" Evelyn leaned on her cane. She looked at the house. She looked at the open door. Then she looked back at Vanessa. She asked the question, the same question that had started the war, but this time, she did not ask it with anger. She asked it with the calm, crushing weight of a judge delivering a sentence. "So, Elena," Evelyn said, her voice clear as a bell, Whose house is this? Vanessa froze. She opened her mouth to scream, "Mine!" one last time. But I stepped up beside my grandmother. I looked Vanessa in the eye. I did not blink. I did not flinch. "It is mine," I said. Vanessa flinched as if I had hit her. "And it always should have been," I added. Vanessa stared at me for one long, hateful second. Then, the fight went out of her. She looked at the deputy, who was checking his watch. She looked at Mark, who was sitting in the cab of the moving truck, refusing to look back. She let out a sob, grabbed her purse from the porch railing, and walked past us. She didn't look back. She got into her car, slammed the door, and peeled away from the curb, leaving a cloud of exhaust that smelled like burning oil. Mark's truck followed a moment later. He slowed down as he passed us. He looked out the window. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something. Maybe I am sorry. Maybe goodbye. But the words got stuck in his throat. He just nodded, a jerky, broken motion, and drove away. I watched them go. I watched the taillights disappear around the corner. They were gone. The noise was gone. The drama was gone. The deputy walked over to me. He held out a small brass ring with 2 keys on it. "Here you go. Ms. Brooks," he said. "The locks have not been changed yet, so these should still work. But I would recommend getting a locksmith out here today." "Thank you, officer," I said, taking the keys. They felt cool and heavy in my hand. The officer tipped his hat and walked back to his cruiser. The neighbors lingered for a moment longer, then slowly drifted back into their houses. Mrs. DeCurr gave me a thumbs up from her porch before going inside. It was just me and Evelyn. We stood in the driveway. The house loomed in front of us. It still had the gray paint Vanessa had chosen. It still had the modern house numbers, but it felt different. The malice was gone. The air felt lighter. "Shall we?" Evelyn asked. I took her arm. We walked up the steps. I put the key in the lock. It turned with a smooth, satisfying click. I pushed the door open. We stepped inside. The house was quiet. It smelled faintly of the cleaning products Vanessa had used, but underneath that, I could smell the old wood, the dust, the history. The living room was empty. The ugly leather sofas were gone. The abstract metal art was gone. It was just a room, a big, empty room, with sunlight streaming through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I walked to the center of the room. I reached out and touched the wall. It was solid. It was real. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I thought about the little girl who used to run through these halls. I thought about the teenager who was made to feel small in her own kitchen. I thought about the woman who had been slapped in the garage. They were all here, but they were not afraid anymore. Evelyn came up beside me. She put her hand over mine on the wall. "You did it," she whispered. "You brought us home." I opened my eyes. I looked at the empty space where my mother's photos used to be. I would put them back. I would paint the walls yellow again. I would plant hydrangeas. "It is not just a house, Grandma," I said softly. "No," she agreed. "It is the truth." I looked at the front door. I walked over and pushed it shut. The latch clicked. The sound echoed through the empty house. It was the sound of a book closing. It was the sound of an ending. And as I stood there, in the silence of the home that was finally, legally, and spiritually mine, I realized I did not feel hate for Vanessa. I did not feel hate for Mark. I just felt a profound, quiet peace. The revenge was not in the eviction. The revenge was not in the lawsuit. The revenge was standing here, in the center of the room, and knowing that no one could ever tell me to leave again. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. So please drop a comment below with your city or country, and let me know what you thought of Elena's victory. Do not forget to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and smash that hype button to help us share more stories of justice and resilience with the world.